Hey everyone, my name is Jeremy Riss, and I did a debate 9 months ago. I asked Bret Weinstein if he could get Michael Shermer on to have a debate with us on some of these conspiracies and stuff, and Michael Shermer agreed, and this was the result of that. I wanted to share it with you all. So once again, this is a replay, and I wanted to scroll that. I wanted to do the scroll. How do I make that scroll? Anyways, so this is a replay and not a live broadcast.
Hey folks, welcome to the Dark Horse Podcast. I have the great pleasure of sitting this morning with Michael Shermer, who is the publisher of Skeptic magazine, and Jeremy Riss, return guest on the Dark Horse Podcast, who has a degree in physics. He runs the Alien Scientist channel, and he is an expert in next generation science and technology. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, thanks.
So we are gathered together to talk about belief and skepticism, and to navigate the difficulty of figuring out what it is we should believe rationally in a moment as confusing as this current one. And I know all three of us have, I believe, a great deal of alignment about wanting to believe only those things that are analytically well supported by evidence, but that has caused us to reach very different conclusions on some important issues of the day. So I don't want this to be viewed as a debate. I'm not sure how productive debate is. I think it would be wise if we viewed this as a friendly discussion to the death. But anyway, gentlemen, let's start out in an area that has a great deal of interest at the current moment, and that has got all three of our attention. The issue of what were once called UFOs that are now called UAPs. Michael, do you want to set us in motion on that topic?
Yeah, sure. Start with the name, UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon. Now it's morphed again into unidentified anomalous phenomenon. This is what Steve Pinker calls the euphemism treadmill. When the word becomes pejorative, the words change. UFOs have always been associated with kind of fringe elements of science or pseudoscience, and people being abducted by aliens and aliens mutilating cattle and all this kind of stuff that's made most scientists avoid the subject entirely. So UAP is I guess a welcome change, because it is an interesting question. But what's the question? So here I divide between two different questions. Are they out there? Have they come here? The they being alien. So, like, for example, often when I express my skepticism that UAPs represent extraterrestrial intelligences, people will say, so you're saying we're all alone in the universe? No, that's not what I'm saying. That's a different question. I support the SETI program. I support the Galileo project. I'm on the Galileo project team. I think it's, very probable that we're not alone in the cosmos. 100 billion galaxies, hundreds of billions of galaxies, each of which has hundreds of billions of stars. Each of these stars has planets, and on. You crunch the numbers in the Drake equation, you get a number that's very unlikely to be 0 or 1. We're the only ones. But that's a different question from have they come here? It's a pretty vast, it's mostly just empty space between the stars. Chances of them finding us, much less being bipedal primates that look a lot like us and have human concerns. These are just very unlikely. But I would be willing to change my mind and say, yeah, okay, we have been visited if the evidence was proportional to that claim. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, as Carl Sagan famously made famous in Cosmos. Wasn't his line initially, but that is to say, everybody agrees on both sides of the discussion that the discovery that we are not alone would be one of the biggest discoveries in the history of science, history of all of humanity. It would be spectacular. I would love to know that that's true, but I don't want to believe in things that have to be believed in to be true. I want it to actually be true. And so how good is the evidence for this extraordinary claim? And it is not extraordinary. It's not even very ordinary. It's mostly anecdotal, a few grainy videos and blurry photographs and things like that. And, it has not convinced me that I can drop my skepticism, reject the null hypothesis, as it were, that we're not being visited, and say that we are being visited because the evidence is so overwhelming. I just don't see that yet.
And let's say that the evidence were to cross that threshold. What would that have to look like for you to reach a different conclusion?
Well, my latest analogy for that is the Chinese spy balloon. When that story first broke in April, I thought, maybe, the pictures weren't all that clear, and the news reporting was also not clear. But within hours, it's like we had better videos and photographs, and then within a few days, we had jets that were scrambled to take close-up photographs of it and video of it. It was unmistakably clear. There it was. And then the pilot shot it down. There it is in the ocean. And at that point, no one's asking about the credentials of the pilot who shot it down. So like a lot of the congressional hearings about the UAPs, everybody talks about the credentials of the eyewitnesses. He's a general, he's a captain, he's the mayor of the town, he's the governor, none of that's relevant if you have evidence. No, who cares what the credentials of the pilot that shot down the Chinese spy balloon? It doesn't matter. The spy balloon is real. The President of the United States issued a statement. The Pentagon, the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, all the major news media covered it. Yeah, well, argument from authority. Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen the Chinese spy balloon with my own eyes. It didn't come over Southern California here. So, but I trust enough of the authorities to assume it's real. That was not a fake.
All right, fair enough. I will say I heard you. Well, go ahead, Jeremy.
Sorry, the fact that it has been completely blown to bits and not recovered, I'm also not surprised with, given the territory that it was shot down over, like ice field, and the fact that it was a spy balloon shot with a Sidewinder missile. So, it's again, I don't have a problem with that. I don't think that that's the best evidence either. I've looked into a lot of the UFO stuff myself, and it's, what are your opinions on some of the top people out there in this field right now? Who a lot of them have turned out to be grifters and people who push fake stories for profit. It seems like a business of sorts to be able to publish fake information and then profit off the dissemination of that as everyone goes crazy, sharing, that and spreading it. And I guess the military sort of doesn't have a problem with those sort of people because they're essentially great counterintelligence assets to them. You have the head of the FAA recently, chiming in. I think the head of NASA has chimed in on this and said, "Oh, I haven't seen anything like this, so therefore they're these things can't be real or they don't exist." But they would have said the same thing in the 1980s about the B-2 flying around and all the sightings that people were seeing of the spy craft that were not yet disclosed back then.
Exactly.
So I think it's much more likely that what we're seeing are next generation technologies, including some things that might not even be physical. Some people have compared it to a cat chasing a laser around and saying, wow, it defies the laws of physics. I can't catch it. It's going so fast and whipping around, when in reality, you can play three-dimensional games with lasers by just crossing two of them in space. It ionizes the air where the two lasers cross. And they were demonstrating this in Japan in 2011, making full-on graphics in the air using laser-induced plasmas.
So we are already in heated agreement on this UAP issue. This delicious episode of Dark Horse is sponsored by the truly delicious Mud Water, which makes a fantastic drink. It's spicy and chock full of adaptogenic mushrooms and Ayurvedic herbs. With 1/7 the caffeine of a cup of coffee, you get the energy without the anxiety, jitters, or crash. If you like the routine of making and drinking a cup of warmth in the morning, but don't drink coffee or are trying to cut down, try Mud Water. That's MUDWTR. Each ingredient was added with intention. It has cacao and chai for just a hint of caffeine, lion's mane mushrooms to support focus, cordyceps to help you support physical performance, chaga and reishi to support your immune system, and cinnamon, which is a potent antioxidant. Mudwater also makes a non-dairy creamer out of coconut milk and MCT, and a sweetener out of coconut palm sugar, lucuma, a fruit of an Andean tree used by the Inca, to add if you prefer those options. Or you can mix and match. Add a bit of their coconut milk and MCT creamer with some honey from bees, real bees, or use Mudwater's lucuma and coconut palm sugar sweetener and skip the bees entirely. Mudwater is 100% USDA organic, non-GMO, gluten-free, vegan, and kosher certified. Mudwater's flavor is warm and spicy with a hint of chocolate, plus masala chai, which includes ginger and cardamom, nutmeg, and cloves. It is also delicious blended into a smoothie. Try it with banana and ice, milk, or a milk-like substance, mint, a touch of honey, and cacao nibs. To get 15% off, go to mudwater.com/darkhorsepod to support the show. Use Dark Horse Pod for 15% off Mudwater. Our second sponsor for this episode is House of Macadamias. Tree nuts are delicious and nutritious and generally high in fat and low in carbohydrates. Unlike what various food pyramids and government agencies might have led you to believe, high-fat, low-carb foods are increasingly understood to be both satiating and good for you. Each species of nut is different, however, requiring a special mindset and, if you are that sort, appropriate footwear. Clogs for some, wading shoes for others. Regardless of what shoes you have available, though, like us, you are likely to find macadamias are the best nut there is. Macadamia nuts take a very long time to grow, and because they are both rare and highly sought after, they have the dubious distinction of being the world's most expensive nut. Between the taste and health benefits, though, they're worth it. They have even fewer carbohydrates than most other nuts, which makes them a perfect snack for breaking a daily fast and controlling blood glucose. They're also uniquely rich in omega-7s, including especially palmitoleic acid, an unsaturated fat that has been linked to natural collagen production, fat loss, and heart health. And House of Macadamias is intent on making this amazing food accessible to everyone. They have partnered with more than 90 farmers in Africa and now make one-of-a-kind vegan, keto, and paleo snacks. These include their dark chocolate-dipped macadamias and a delicious assortment of bars made with 45% macadamia nuts in flavors including salted caramel and chocolate coconut. Our favorite product code, Dark Horse. I believe I am not exaggerating to say that all three of us believe we are very likely not alone in the universe, would be very excited to discover that we were being visited, but find ourselves deeply skeptical of the evidence that we have been shown, which so far is best explained by terrestrial phenomena and portrayal rather than aliens visiting us and doing things that are beyond such an explanation. Is that fair?
Yeah, I picture Marco Rubio finally getting permission to go into one of these warehouses where the spaceships are being kept, and it's like the next generation of the stealth bomber or fighter or something like that. And he's like, "Oh, this is what we're working on." Yeah. Well, I can't tell the public about that. No, of course you can't. No. And then he comes out and says, "Nothing to see here, folks." Oh no, he's lying. He's covering up the aliens.
Yeah,
right.
It's something to do along those lines. I would say invisibility technology has been a hotly studied topic out at Area 51. It's was Project Rainbow was started there in the 1950s and to specifically investigate invisibility technology. So we're now in generations of metamaterials since the 1980s and 90s when the term was first coined. So what we have in terms of invisibility technology, and then you have to think about and something else out there that's thousands of years more advanced than us. I'd like to compare it to a Star Trek episode called Who Watches the Watchers, where basically the Star Trek is they're observing this Bronze Age civilization and they're using invisibility cloak from their observation platform. And then one day the power thing goes down, and these beings, their hidden rock facade goes away, and they're exposed, and they try to go down and tell the Bronze Age civilization, that, hey, we're just scientists and trying to study you, and they don't understand. They're like, you guys are gods, and no, you came from the heavens and the stars, and then so it just starts this whole religion and mythology with the people in the Star Trek episode as they interact with them more, and they realize that we're just doing more damage. And
if I had a nickel for every time that happened to me, man.
But I think go ahead. Yeah.
But it is interesting.
I guess one response to that is, before we invoke those kind of explanations, that it's our technology or Russian or Chinese or something like that. A lot of these videos, I think, have more mundane explanations. They're just balloons, or it's the way the camera mounted on the bottom of the plane was rotating, and the FLIR effects and those sorts of things, I think, can explain at least some of the video effects. As you know, McWest has been all over this. And there's a video going around of Scott Kelly, the astronaut and pilot, at that one of these NASA hearings where they're talking about UAPs, and he gets up and gives his little speech, and he says, because people are talking, well, these pilots are trained, they know what to look for, they can assess size and distance. He goes, let me tell you about pilots and our ability to assess things. He goes, when I was up in it was his brother, I think, who was in the space shuttle, and they were about to close the cargo bay doors. And one of the other astronauts said, wait, there's something floating around in the cargo bay. We better get that thing. It's an instrument or a tool or something we left in there. Before we close it, we better go get it. And then they're looking at the thing, and they realize that's the space station 80 miles away.
Yeah.
It's just like, what? And he talks about pilots. He said, I was up in the plane, and my co-pilot goes, oh my God, there's a UAP. What? We better go check it out. So they whip around and go back, and it's a Bart Simpson balloon. And he had a bunch of stories like this. Pilots want a rendezvous with another pilot, and turns out it's a buoy on the ocean. So, distances are hard to measure. It's hard to know what's going on. Illusions are common.
There are lots of ways that people could see something that isn't what it appears to be, and that problem gets exponentially worse if something is interested in misleading us at the level of our perceptions, which is unfortunately a real possibility. For various reasons. I mean, including one reason that you might want to mislead us is to get people to tune this topic out, ultimately, to create a lot of excitement about UAPs that aren't UAPs, so that people get over it because there is something to know. So, it becomes a hall of mirrors when one is trying to properly evaluate the evidence in this realm. Which then raises the next question. I mean, we do all roughly agree on this one. Where we may differ is, what is it, in light of the pollution of the information environment and the many different ways that terrestrial phenomena could be mistaken for extraterrestrial phenomena, what is it that each of us would accept as evidence that we actually were being visited?
Well, okay, so just one response to that is like, I can imagine someone in DARPA or the CIA sitting back there going, they think it's the aliens again. This is great. This is such a great misdirection from what we want them to know, because we don't want the Russians and Chinese to know we have this technology.
Reporting aliens and UFOs, and not the craft, and their perception on it is through a different set of goggles. It's through a colored glasses. Yeah. Now, because of that, it's great.
Yeah, I can see that. The other idea that the hypothesis that they're Russian or Chinese technology, and somehow the Russians or Chinese have developed like anti-gravity propulsion systems, or these kinds of technologies that are like decades or centuries ahead of what we have. That's not possible. That's just not how it works. We steal their secrets, they steal our secrets. History of technology and science is very cumulative. No one gets very far ahead of anybody else ever. Even so, the examples I use, like the Manhattan Project, the most secret project ever. The Russians stole our secrets and had a bomb within 2 to 3 years.
If there isn't aliens, if they're not hiding aliens, because that was, according to the witnesses, classified 2 levels higher than the Manhattan Project.
Oh, well, okay.
Right.
But also, what else would be true? If the Russians had this super technology, wouldn't we see it in Ukraine? And we don't see anything like that. In fact, they're just pretty primitive what they're doing there. So wouldn't they
It
use
almost
that
seems like they're
technology?
clearing out their old war inventory for something new.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know.
Well, actually, that may well be part of the explanation for our involvement as well, is that we have a lot of weapons that sit in warehouses, and from a business perspective, clearing those warehouses means a bull market for new weapons. I have been led to understand that is a motivating factor by people inside the industry. So that frightens me. And it could be that something parallel is going on the Russian side.
You mean like the military-industrial complex kind of idea?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah. It really looks like there is something to that. RFK Jr. has been talking about that, but that goes back to Eisenhower. I think that's true.
So let me just say, from my perspective, there is maybe only one slam dunk answer to the question of what I would accept as evidence that we were being visited. And it's the one that is conspicuously absent from the discussion almost entirely, which is the biology.
Yeah.
If you were to show an actual alien pilot to a competent team of biologists, and they were allowed to ask natural questions, to run experiments that they believed worthy of running, a competent team of biologists could very easily rule out the two possibilities that would have to be ruled out. One of them being that what is in front of them is not in fact biological, and the other is that what is in front of them is biological but not Earth-based. If they ruled out the Earth-based and the non-biological, we would be left with a creature whose complexity was too great to be faked, and whose nature was most easily explained by an extraterrestrial origin, which is, I think, why we're not talking about it. Because
we thought we had
to the extent that we
Stephen Greer and the Atacama skeleton, remember? But it turned out to be just a mummified a fetus or something. It was a human.
Right.
Yeah. By the way, David Grush has been talking about non-human biologics.
Yeah, I think we should address that term.
I took a picture of one.
Wow, that looks like a bird of paradise, Michael.
It's a non-human biologic. No.
Yeah. So let's help. Maybe we could help David Grush with his terminology a little bit here, because non-human biologics is such a broad term. What would we call this if you had 3 words to describe what you just described to us as your prime example of undeniable proof that we're not alone?
I would say presumptively extraterrestrial biology that is most easily explained by a separate tree of life, period, the end.
Yeah. Would that be not DNA? It had some other self-replicating.
Well, let's put it this way. I'm okay with even if it has DNA, but what I'm going to become very suspicious if the DNA code is the same one that terrestrial biology has. I would be interested in seeing a radically different DNA code coupled with, if it's built of cells, which is likely, coupled with a cellular profile that is radically distinct. Probably it would have organelles. Those organelles would probably not be either chloroplasts or mitochondria. Mm-hmm. So anyway, DNA is a possibility.
What about gene drives?
Different DNA code would be a slam dunk.
What if we went back to Precambrian green blue algae and found a gene drive in ginkgo biloba, one of these ancient species? Would you think that a gene like inserted information inside the DNA?
Well, yeah, I think, look, as long as we're opening up I keep a list in my own mind of things that would tell me that the fundamentals of what I believe are wrong. If I found, for example, a Bible verse from any terrestrial Bible inscribed in the information molecules inside of a creature that I could be confident was a natural creature and not something that had been tinkered and had this Bible verse installed, I would have to rethink my epistemology. I just simply would, right?
Yeah. Do you know Paul Davies' proposal for a second Genesis on Earth. This is his proposal that it didn't have to be DNA. It could have been some other self-replicating molecule system. And if we found that on Earth, it'd be a second Genesis. So in a way, it's looking for extraterrestrial intelligence, but terrestrial intelligence as a second start. Would be billions of years old or something. No one's found this, but that would be a reasonable test.
So I think this is at some level, this is the heart of the matter that we are going to end up focusing on here, which is there are many possibilities, and the ability to exclude possibilities is fundamental to clear thought. But the ease with which one dismisses a true possibility because it is initially unlikely, or because the evidence that supports it does not meet the intuitive threshold of being extraordinary enough, whatever the case may be, it's very easy to throw out a correct explanation because at the moment you check in on it, it's not supported by the right stuff. So really, all three of us are going to embrace the idea that skepticism is fundamental. But the idea that skepticism of what? Sometimes you need to be skeptical of the published literature. We've just seen that with COVID. And that's a very uncomfortable place to find yourself, because once you realize that the published literature can't be trusted, now you're in a world of potentially very low quality evidence, which is not a good place to try to make sense of the world.
Yeah, I was just talking to Avi Loeb, since I'm on the Galileo project, and he has a big profile in the New York Times Magazine about him that just came out this week. And he said they interviewed him for hours and hours and hours. And then after that, the fact checkers called him and, did you say this? Here's your exact quote. This is what we're going to use. And he says they still got half of the story wrong. And he said, then I got to thinking, then I actually said, well, what if it's a story about what's happening in Ukraine? And, how would I know what's happening in Ukraine? I trust the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, or whatever. What if it's as bad as they can't even get the story about Avi Loeb right?
It is.
Yeah,
It's trust me.
Amnesia.
I have to tell you, you read about events that happen in the paper, and they're completely different than if you knew what actually happened in real life, and were connected to anyone in there and do your own investigation. You often find different things than other people find, and that's true about everything. It's kind of this. I call it. I refer to like Heidegger's philosophy of just what he said in disclosure. With every disclosure, there's concealment, and with every concealment, there's also disclosure. So it's like this back and forth thing. As you look through one lens, you're sort of putting on blinders to other angles, and sometimes. But I don't know. We had a discussion about some of this. The Roswell thing. Maybe we could dig into Roswell for a second. Because
let me make one comment, Jeremy, about something you said about the kind of DARPA research. Back to Brett's question of what it would take, not just biologics, but if there were technology that was something like an anti-gravitational propulsion system, and the guys at DARPA look at this thing and go, oh my God, no one on Earth ever thought of this physics and engineering or whatever.
But how would you know that the guys at DARPA said that rather than the guys
if they actually said it?
Well, no, this I don't get. There's a layer of weakness that surrounds claims. So my trajectory through logic space has left me very suspicious of things that are entirely based on pixels. We've gotten very good at arranging pixels so they can do some very compelling things. And frankly, and you alluded to this up top, Michael, the credentials of the people doing the claiming. The fact is, these are human beings. These are human beings who respond to incentives. Some human beings are shameless. Once a human being is frightened, even one who is capable of shame may say things that they would not otherwise contemplate. So, the problem is, if DARPA is the place that they would be likely to discover some transcendent new technological opportunity like anti-gravity, I don't know what to make if the DARPA guys say, yeah, this is anti-gravity and it has to be extraterrestrial because we've never thought of this stuff. How do I know that they're not covering something that they did think of?
Yeah, but then now you get to a much harder problem. Why should we believe anything the government or corporations ever tell us about anything?
This unfortunately, Michael, this is the question, and it's not. I don't want it to be the question. I want us to have a institutional layer that purges us of things that mislead us into self-harm. But we obviously don't have that. We just went through 3 years of nonstop self-harm as a result of authorities who not only assured us that they knew what they were talking about, but shamed us if we asked the most basic questions. So,
Yes.
yeah, I'm not happy to live in a world where we can't trust these things, but I believe that's the world we live in.
9 out of 10 doctors smoke Camels. So, that ad from the 60s, you know. So,
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, I mean,
when you get that
yeah.
threshold is what is
I mean,
propaganda.
the problem with people like, I know the problem with people like RFK Jr. is that some of the stuff he says is true. Like Big Pharma captured the regulatory state and sold a lie about opioids, that they're not addictive. That's true. They did do that. How did they do that? They just bought off the politicians and the regulators.
Yep.
Really? Unbelievable. And it's like big tobacco.
Well, the problem is that the more you dig into the extraordinary things that RFK Jr. says that can't possibly be true, the more you find that actually what he says is at least based on a rational evaluation of a chain of evidence that people are largely unaware of.
And so it depends. He
him.
makes so many claims. I mean, Paul Offit's been posting a lot of RFK Jr.'s claims, and then like he talks about this study that was done in 1967. Here's the actual study. Here's the quotes from it. Here's the findings, and this is why RFK Jr. is wrong about this particular thing here. Go, and then it's like he invites him.
Yeah, but
please respond.
Paul Offit just tried to distract us into believing that the problems with the mRNA vaccines had to do with the choice of spike protein as the antigenic target. I don't know why he did that. I do know that he is not insulated from perverse incentives surrounding vaccines. In fact, it appears that he has a conflict of interest, which
he did address the conflict of interest thing. He made no money because he works for that company, whatever organization he works for. But he doesn't get any of that.
No.
There are other ways
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know where his conflicts of interest begin and end. What I do know is that the portrayal, which to me is absurd, that the spike protein is the source of all the harm. I think the spike protein is the source of some harm, but the idea that the spike protein is the fundamental problem with the mRNA vaccines would rescue that platform from a much more fundamental problem, which will accompany any vaccine you attempt to create on it. The fact that there is no targeting of those mRNAs so that they can land in any cell means that every time you attempt to vaccinate somebody with that technology, you are inviting an autoimmune attack on the tissue that happens to pick up the lipid nanoparticle. So to me, Paul Offit is no authority I'm ready to trust, because where I can check his work, it appears to proceed from a conflict of interest, not from a rational evaluation of the evidence of where the harm comes from.
I don't know, Brett. I mean, just everything you just rattled off, I have no idea what you're even talking about. It's way out of my field.
But here, I'd be happy to explain it. It's very simple, actually.
But there are tons of people that this is what they do. They study vaccines and public health and so on. And, how do they not know this?
But that's the question, Michael. I mean, and honestly, this is the reason for us to meet, and it's probably the reason for us to move away from UAPs, where we agree, and it evidences the fact that we all share the same values with respect to getting this stuff right and exerting skepticism correctly. But how did so many people get the mRNA vaccine platform wrong? I can't answer that question, but I can tell you that they did, because the way
how do you know they did?
For the following reason. If you look at the description of how the vaccine is supposed to work, the description given by those who designed the vaccine itself, it leads you directly to the question of, won't the cells that transcribe this mRNA message, won't they inherently be attacked by T cells whose function is to destroy virally infected cells. In other words, what causes cells in the human body to be attacked by T cells is the evidence that they have been captured by a virus, and that evidence comes in the following form. They are displaying antigens that you yourself make, and they are displaying foreign antigens that you do not make. Any cell that does that is presumed by the immune system to be virally infected, and it is attacked by the immune system because killing it off is how the body overcomes viral disease. So if the vaccine, the so-called vaccine, stayed in your deltoid when they injected it, then the answer is, well, the cells that will be attacked by your immune system are in your arm, and you can afford to lose them. Once we knew that the vaccine circulated around the body, it should be clear to anyone who understands how immunity develops that this is going to cause an autoimmune disorder in any tissue that transcribes it. And if that tissue happens to be your heart, it's going to be a devastating problem. So how Paul Offit doesn't know that? I think Paul Offit has to know that. How did the other people who signed off on this not know it?
But
I don't know.
He's not here. I don't even know what you're talking about. So you float this hypothesis. Jeremy and I this is not what we do. So I don't even know how to, how is it possible? Not just Paul Offit, it's like thousands of scientists would have to be either just delusional or bought off or.
Perfect. So here's what we've got. You can't evaluate what I said, nor should you be able to. You're not a biologist. Here's what you can know, though. I have just staked my reputation on a claim about how the immune system works and how the vaccine, as described by those who designed it, should work. If I'm wrong, you, Michael Shermer, are sitting here, and there should be a flood of biologists ready to explain what I've got wrong. And when that flood of biologists doesn't show up, you should ask yourself the question, why is that? If Paul Offit is right and Bret Weinstein is wrong, why is nobody pointing out the reason?
Well, did you invite them on your show to talk about it? I mean,
it doesn't matter. You can invite them. I'll invite them. Show me who knows the answer to the question. Okay. And I'll be happy to talk to them.
Maybe I'll host an episode of the Michael Shermer Show with you and whoever.
I would love that. If you want to bring Paul Offit on.
Who's the guy that Rogan wanted to have back on? Oh, Peter Hotez. Yeah, maybe
Peter
somebody
Hotez.
It's yeah, okay.
Okay, but nonetheless, let's separate this from the question of
was lab engineered or was it a natural origin? I'm curious.
See, to me, that's a completely open. I'll agree with Bret on this. That that should have been always on the table as a reasonable hypothesis. Why not? It was never a conspiracy theory that Chinese intended to kill people with this virus. It was that they fucked up and human error, and it leaked out of a lab. That always seemed to me entirely plausible. Why did that get shut down?
Why did that get shut down? And now that we have the evidence of the emails in which we see that the very people who told us that it was preposterous to imagine it could have come from the lab privately believed that was more likely than not, right? That tells you something about the degree to which cover-up might be playing a role in our narrative. And you have to say, so again, I don't want to stick on COVID here. My point is not about COVID. My point is about what you do in a badly polluted information environment. Yeah. And, either I just said something preposterous about immunity and vaccines that reveals my ignorance, or I didn't. And it seems to me it should be pretty easy for us to figure out which thing just happened. And to the extent that what you're going to discover is that what I said is perfectly reasonable, and any expert in immunology ought to know that. If you discover that probably ought to make you think, wait, what else is hiding in plain sight? Because that certainly is.
Another observation I made, I watched the whole 3 hours of Rogan's podcast with RFK Jr. And, he starts off with you can't really trust scientific authorities. They get it wrong. And just all the things similar to what you said. And then they got talking about climate change. And then RFK Jr. was like, oh, you got to trust the science. The consensus is in, the scientists get it right. And they're right about this one. And it's going to be a catastrophe. And we're going to sue these oil companies and for ruining our futures. Like, wait a minute, I thought you just said you can't trust the scientific authorities and that there's no such thing as scientific consensus. So even he's not consistent about his skepticism. Well,
I mean, look, none of us are perfectly consistent, and I don't even think it's conceivable that you could be. That's the whole reason to have this discussion is even if we, at a values level, and believe me, I think if RFK Jr. were sitting here with the three of us, you would find that values-wise, he's perfectly aligned. The point is, the trajectory he has taken through history has left him skeptical of different things than you or me or Jeremy. And that is the question. How do those of us who agree that proper scientific skepticism is the way to analytical clarity, how do we figure out how to talk to each other about which things are in our blind spots? I certainly want to know. There's no question about that.
Yeah, right. Well, again, back to the Paul Offit example, where he would cite something that RFK Jr. said about this study concluding X, and then he presents the study. He goes, here it is. Here's the excerpts from it. Here's the data and so on. And it shows the opposite of that. Why did you say that? And he, at the end of his little columns, is a Substack column, RFK Jr., why are you saying that? Here is why you're wrong. Please respond. And then, of course, you get no response.
I have never had that experience with Robert Kennedy Jr., and I know him pretty well, and I have pushed him.
You do? I don't know.
Times.
Yeah, okay.
No, I do know him, and
well, maybe, yeah. Well, so why does he not respond? Does he not like Offit, or is there some bad blood there, or something? I don't really know why.
Well, I don't know. I'm not going to speak for him, but I would say my guess would be, from having delved in areas where Bobby Kennedy and I see things alike, that the information environment inside the published literature is so thoroughly compromised that the art is in figuring out which studies were correctly done, which is not simple. It requires an awful lot of legwork.
It's an advanced field.
Yeah. So, okay. So since the replication crisis started around 2010, half of all psych experiments probably should have never been published, but a lot of medical experiments probably should have never been published. And some of them are so complex that it's hard to even honestly try to replicate them, because even the people reporting them maybe left out a few of the steps that they did, or the file drawer problem, or they did a little p-hacking that was acceptable at the time, and so on. So, okay. So even the checkable empirical questions you're bringing up should be answerable. Maybe even that's hard. Separate from the political question, mass mandates or vaccine mandates, that's a political question, not a scientific one. But some of the stuff you said we should be able to find out yes or no. The stuff about the protein spikes or whatever that was. I mean, it's either true or not, right?
Yeah, what I said is either true or not. And I'm looking for the credible voice who can explain why it isn't true, because I know that it is true. It's not this. Let's put it this way. There is highly advanced immunobiology that is beyond my expertise. This isn't at that level. This is pretty basic. And it should be very easy for somebody to show where I've got it wrong. It's not the first time I've talked about it, and I'm not the only person who's talked about it either.
So don't people write you and go, Bret, here's the reason why you're wrong, and here's the citation, or something like this?
I have literally never seen a credible response to this claim. I've seen attacks on my character.
I'm going to find out.
Challenge.
I mean, let me also say this to you, Mike, we're going to move topics here in a second, but let me say this to you also. As with everything, if I am wrong about this, boy, that's not going to be a fun moment for me. But I would much rather get to the next moment where I start being right about things again than double down on an idea I'm incorrect about. That is where I'm at. So if I'm wrong about this, I'm going to have to see the evidence that I'm wrong, but I will shift my position.
Okay.
That's just the way it is. All right. So I don't want to stick too heavily over UAPs and where we disagree. I think that topic has done a good job of demonstrating that we are aligned in our objectives, and in that case land with our skepticism pointed in the same direction, that there's something about the current UAP story that is not compelling us, that the most likely explanation is extraterrestrial.
I also don't think
what I want to do is
hiding it either. I just want to clarify that. I think if they do have it, it's inside of a container organization where it's untouchable by FOIA, because the FOIA requests seem to have gone nowhere so far in finding it. So I don't know, if you go back to the military industrial complex and the Manhattan Project, you'll find a lot of organizations where they hid components of the Manhattan Project, which are still around today and even manage all of our national laboratories. So they're in a perfect position currently to basically have a one-up on all the science that's discovered at our national labs, and also have access to a file like this that's untouchable by even the Pentagon or FOIA requests. So if it does exist, it's not inside the government, it's inside a private military industrial complex, contractor where it's untouchable by FOIA. And I don't think it's very likely that Marco Rubio or any of these guys will have access to that unless they really dig hard.
Yeah, see, that's the thing that bothers me. How can we answer the question then if we can't trust anybody? If you can't get even somebody as high up and influential as Marco Rubio to get to the answer to the question? And you've seen these videos of like Clinton and Hillary and Obama on these comedian late night talk shows where they ask them, can you tell us what happened in Roswell? I'm going to look into this. And then, nothing ever comes of it. Maybe they do. Maybe there's things the president doesn't know that Congress doesn't know. And when I was researching my conspiracy book, I read all the stuff about the CIA. And, the CIA, they did a lot of pretty nefarious things over the decades. And, it's almost nothing would surprise me, this like Project Blue Book. Or no, sorry, not Project, Project Paperclip. Sorry, I misspoke. Project Paperclip is where we got all these Nazi scientists, chemists, biologists, and physicists to come on our side before the Russians got them. You sort of see the politics behind that. But, and I just visited the Auschwitz exhibition at the Reagan Museum. And so they sort of show all this stuff. And they had the pictures of these Nazis that worked at Auschwitz. Some of them ended up coming to America and living in Ohio, working at some company, developing biological weapons or chemical weapons. It's like, this is astonishing. At the same time, we have these other guys that did the same thing at the Nuremberg trial in the dock and executed for war crimes. So governments are not always not to be trusted. They do lie. They do cover stuff up. Project MK Ultra, dosing U.S. citizens with mind-altering drugs without their consent or knowledge. It's like, the COINTEL program of spying on the civil rights activists, including MLK Jr., and taping his sex in a hotel room to blackmail him. I mean, this is illegal. This is astonishing that, and I can go on
trying
and
to
on.
induce him to commit suicide.
Yeah, unbelievable. So I get it when people go, you can't trust the government, can't trust the CIA. Yeah, I see why. So then who should we believe? And when and what criteria?
All right.
I don't know.
So here's what I'm hoping you gentlemen will help me with. Now let's move to a topic where I know that we have fierce disagreements. It's also a topic that is back on people's minds for obvious reasons. But the Kennedy assassinations. Do you guys want to, before we get into a discussion of how to think about these things, do you guys each want to state where you fall out on the question of the John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy assassinations?
Okay. You want to go first, Jeremy, or should I?
Yeah. Well, I mean, both of those have been brought to attention. We mentioned RFK Jr., and he's expressed his concerns and skepticism over his father's assassination and also his uncle's. I know I've spent a lot of time in, the early days of the internet researching JFK, and have gone back to it a few times over the years. And I just went back to it recently this weekend and found a whole new channel called America's Untold Stories with this very interesting new channel. And it's just so much more information's come out of the research into the Kennedy assassination. I think it's almost undeniable at this point that Oswald was a CIA asset, had ties to both the FBI and the CIA prior to being set up in Dallas at this Texas School Book Depository building, which was, of course, owned by the guy who started the Civil Air Patrol, which got Oswald into the CIA through David Ferry and a number of other individuals who are also connected with Civil Air Patrol, like Roscoe White, who went to Atsugi with Oswald and then ended up on the Dallas police force with a bunch of other corrupt police. So the corruption in Dallas police, the mayor having his, Cabell having his brother being one of the CIA guys that JFK kicked out alongside Allen Dulles, who was later put in charge of the Warren Commission investigation into his assassination. It's pretty clear that they gave the Foxes the keys to the hen house and put the murderers in charge of the investigation into who committed the crime. So that's my position on it.
So is it fair to summarize? Is it fair to summarize your position as Oswald was involved?
Yes, absolutely. He was
not act
involved.
alone,
To what extent, I don't know.
The CIA appears to have been,
There was
Okay.
more than one shooter.
Michael?
I don't believe the magic bullet theory. And I think more than multiple shooters are the best explanation for all the bullet holes, the eyewitness reports, multiple suspicious deaths of witnesses, including ones that were supposed to testify in the House Select Committee on Assassinations 10 years later when they tried to open a reinvestigation into this conspiracy with the CIA, and just numerous people ended up whacked before they could testify before that committee. I think it's just it's overwhelming when you dig into it now, especially 50 years, 60 years later, where we are now with the amount of research that's been done thanks to the internet and collaboration of researchers. But I don't know.
Okay, Michael?
Yep. Well, yeah, definitely. We have a point of disagreement there. Yeah, I definitely think Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. I don't think there's any evidence. There's not a convergence of evidence toward any other one particular person. You'll often hear something like, well, the CIA was involved. Well, yeah, exactly who? I mean, if there were enough evidence to put somebody into at least a grand jury investigation, would they therefore vote to take it to trial? And there's never been enough evidence to name anybody else to do even that. And people have attempted to do this, famously Jim Garrison. And the whole Oliver Stone JFK film is based on Garrison's investigation of Ferry and so forth. And and the jury came back like in an hour and said, no, there's nothing here. This man is free. And these Oswald has been tried in absentia, as it were. Yeah, Clay Shaw. The BBC hosted a sort of a faux trial of Lee Harvey Oswald, in which Vincent Bugliosi played the prosecuting attorney, the guy that prosecuted Manson, and Jerry Spence, the famous defense attorney, defended Oswald. And it was not a real trial, of course. Oswald's dead, but as close as they could get. And the jury came back in an hour and said, nope, Oswald is guilty, acted alone. There was no evidence for anybody else, and so on. So there's a lot of this. So let's just think about this. How to think about it. The way I think about it is a convergence of evidence to one particular hypothesis being true, and a lack of convergence of evidence to any other hypothesis. There's lots of anomalies, and this is what we call anomaly hunting. Any event that's big and massive, it's easy to find lots of anomalies. 9/11, there's just dozens and dozens of just weird things that happened that day. And the 9/11 truthers, they parade these things out, but there's no convergence of evidence of like who in the Bush administration would have done this, how would they have done this, exactly where did they do this, and when, and and there's just nothing there for that. And I think it's like that with the JFK thing. I mean, like a lot of the anomalies. How did Oswald? Just one point. Like, how did Oswald get the job at the book depository building that just happened to be on the parade route? Well, Gerald Posner chased that down and showed that he got the job before the parade route had even been determined where he was going to go. That was just randomness. And there's a lot of those things that turn out to be random or just lies. Like Oliver Stone has his character in the film.
And the mayor of Dallas.
One last point, and then I'll shut up. Oliver Stone has his character, I think it was Jack Lemmon character, say Oswald shot Maggie's drawers when he was in the army. He couldn't hit the side of a barn door. In fact, Posner tracked down his riflery scores. He had the second highest score possible. And if you go to Dealey Plaza, which I've been to twice, you look out the the book depository building, there's 2 X's in the road, the throat shot and the head shot. They are close. I mean, they're like right there. It would be hard to miss, in fact. And he was a good shot. Anyway, so I'll let that go.
So do you think that Oswald is the one that shot General Walker in April of 63?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah.
So why did he miss the shot?
Well, he shot at him.
Still, he's sitting still from 60 feet away.
He was
missed that target.
Walker was in the house. The bullet was deflected by the window frame, as I understand it.
Yeah, but it just seems like such an easy shot. You had all that time to line it up.
And he was a nut. By the way,
target 60
if you look
feet
at
away.
Oswald's history, he's a nut. Why would the CIA hire a nut job like Oswald?
Well, they deal with.
Wouldn't they hire a professional assassin, somebody who knows what they're doing?
It depends. Doesn't it depend on what his role was? If his role was to take the fall, if the idea was lone gun nut is going to be the explanation for what would amount.
Right.
Let's put it this way, Michael. One of 2 things happened in Dealey Plaza. Either it was an assassination, pure and simple, or it was a coup, right?
Well, those aren't 2 different.
One is
the same thing.
An assassination can be part of a coup, or it.
Yeah, I guess.
Say that again, Jeremy.
Is that false dichotomy though? It's like it has to be this thing or the other, one or the other. So it's
they could be the same.
I'm not saying that these are 2 categories that have to be. I'm saying in this case, given what we know, either the person who committed the murder went on to die shortly thereafter and therefore did not gain any power from doing so, or the murder of John F. Kennedy resulted in a shift of power in the direction of people who were in some way meant to gain power from the event.
Mm-hmm.
But Johnson, I mean, he's a Democrat, he's a liberal, and Kennedy wasn't about to de-escalate Vietnam. His own brother said, no, we weren't about to pull out our not troops, but police action, whatever they call it. That wasn't going to happen.
Well, look,
the helicopter.
There's a question about
the case.
These are just plausible, just so stories for a motivation for the assassination. But that's not evidence to convict somebody that they actually did that. They could have done, Kennedy said, I want to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces, famous quote, after the Bay of Pigs when they lied to him.
Mm-hmm.
He understandably was pissed off. And of course, presidents shoot their mouth off, as we know, about all sorts of things. That doesn't mean.
What about all the guys from the CIA who organized the Bay of Pigs, like David Atlee Phillips and Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis? These guys hated Kennedy, and they were talking about, whacking him down in Florida and New Orleans and stuff the week before.
Think about all the people that hate Trump, but no one assassinated Trump.
Well, they had a plot in Chicago.
What kind of evidence is that, Michael? That's not evidence.
This is hindsight bias. Once Kennedy is shot, then you go back in time and go, okay, let's see who hated him. Well, lots of people hate Trump, and if somebody assassinated Trump, you go, oh, okay, now we're going to go back and find the people that really hate him. Let me just make, since you mentioned the magic bullet. So in my chapter, here's my book, Conspiracy. In the chapter on JFK, I actually have the magic. So here's the magic bullet theory, in which Kennedy and Connally are lined up perfectly and the bullet has to make a right turn, a left turn. That is not how they were seated. This is how they were actually seated. The limousine had a jump seat that was lower and off kilter to where Kennedy was from Connally. So they were actually perfectly lined up with the bullet coming from back in the book depository, straight through the 2 of them, right through the next shot. The first shot missed. The second shot was the next shot. The third shot was the head shot. 85% of all ear witnesses said 3 shots. They heard 3 shots. And then here you can see one last point on this. There's the so-called pristine bullet, which was not pristine. It was bent. It was dented that way. Now, this is going to be hard to see in here, but if you look at Zapruder film 313, you can find this online. And there's high-resolution versions of it cleaned up, and they show it in super slow motion. It's a pretty gruesome scene. But the brain matter goes up and forward, like the shot came from behind, not back and to the left like in the JFK film. Back and to the left, back and to the left. That isn't what happened. The brain matter goes forward and up. up and
You
forward.
can see some of it splatter at the impact point where I think the bullet hit for the front of the head, but I see the head go back into the left after the bullet
the shot.
hit.
But the initial brain matter goes forward, up and forward. You can see it in the photo. It's hard to see in that black and white photo, but if you look at the color version on YouTube, you can see that. It's really clear. People put arrows to show where the brain matter is going.
I think that there's a whole conspiracy with there to change the wounds. They flew him out of Dallas, which by law, if you die in Dallas, your autopsy has to be performed right in the state in the county that you die in. But they specifically move him to Bethesda Naval Hospital, where they lose his brain. Multiple things happen to his corpse. There's very poor documentation. All the Parkland hospitals that describe the wounds on JFK, having seen him in the trauma room 1, their stories are completely inconsistent with all that evidence. And then the body that gets to Bethesda may not actually be JFK's, according to some of these researchers who have found out that J.D. Tippit, the police officer who Oswald supposedly shot on his way from the school book depository to the theater, J.D. Tippit was this Dallas police officer who looked just like JFK. They used to get teased by the other officers that they used to call him Jack, and there's a belief that he was used as the body double because the way that he was apparently shot, at point blank range, right from in the exact way that JFK's head wounds were. So if they switched the body, they could have, shown the coronary that, he was shot
an eyewitness.
That way.
There was an eyewitness that saw Oswald shoot Tippit. But there was an eyewitness that saw Oswald shoot Tippit.
So
there's another eyewitness that said there was 2 people there, and the description of the people that ran away did not match Oswald's description.
Sorry, Brett, go ahead. Yeah.
So I want to just point out the weakness in your position, Michael, and it's not that this inherently makes you wrong, but it's something I think you have to acknowledge. The problem with conspiracy is that it upends Occam's razor. When there is a conspiracy, what we have is inherently an attempt to make some set of facts align to point to an explanation that is not true. That is the nature of a conspiracy.
Right.
And so what you are pointing to, Michael, is a set of facts that admittedly points to an explanation that we've all been told is true and some of us disbelieve. It's not surprising that you would be able to put together that chain of evidence. The question is that chain of evidence actually more robust than an alternative analysis that looks at all of these pieces and attempts, in other words, Occam's razor is a property of the universe. It ought to be true when you have all of the evidence. We never have all of the evidence. And so what we are left with is a question of what is the correct frame? What is the sum total of facts that we are actually trying to account for? And that's the reason that people who, like all of us, believe in Occam's razor, but we end up at different conclusions. The question is, what set of facts did we hold ourselves responsible for reconciling? And what set of facts did we feel entitled to exclude? And I think there's something buried in your point about anomalies. Because you're absolutely right that in any sort of complex, especially a chaotic environment like an assassination, there are going to be coincidences, anomalies that mean nothing. Those things are going to exist. But there is also some threshold, some number of anomalies that is too many to be accounted for by the circumstances. And so we have to both be good at not leaping to conclusions because we see 1 or 2 anomalies, but at the point that there are too many anomalies, failing to jump is an equally severe problem.
Yeah, okay, that's a fair point. Part of the problem, though, is because if it's a big event, people are very interested in chasing down all those anomalies. If it was the mayor of Dallas that was assassinated in Dealey Plaza, would we be having this conversation? Would anybody care? Would there be any books, movies? No one would care. All those anomalies would not even appear on the radar because no one would be looking for them. But like, so I talk about one of these. Do you know who Louis Stephen Witt is? W-I-T-T, Louis Witt, aka the Umbrella Man. So out there on the grass is a guy on a clear sunny day with no forecast of rain. Is a guy with an umbrella. What was this guy doing there? Oh my God! That maybe this umbrella was an actual weapon, and so I actually have a picture of this umbrella that could be used as a gun, because
that's a real invention.
Me,
that's a real CIA invention, by the way.
It's a real invention. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So finally, like a decade later, he finally comes out into the clear, and actually Earl Morris did a short film for the New York Times on the Umbrella Man and told his whole story. And his story was that the umbrella was a sign of protest against Kennedy, because Kennedy's father, Joseph, was kind of friendly toward the Nazis, was friendly toward appeasing the Nazis. And when Neville Chamberlain gets off the plane after meeting with Herr Hitler, who promised he wouldn't take any more territory, and he's got his umbrella and he's got the piece of paper, look, Hitler signed, he promised. And so the umbrella became a protest against the Kennedy family for being appeasers. And he felt, this Louis Witt, that JFK himself was an appeaser, and therefore he was against him, and he was out there protest. So all of that, none of that would have happened again.
I heard the theory that
instead of JFK,
that it was David Morales, and that he was there to tell Kennedy that they were going to kill him for not supplying air support for the Bay of Pigs invasion, and that was the CIA's way of letting Kennedy know.
I see.
I've heard that
also,
one too.
But hold on. I think the umbrella is the perfect demonstration of both your point, Michael, and my point here. As far as I know, the umbrella is a red herring in conspiracy land. That it does turn out to have a mundane explanation, although in trying to sort out what may have taken place that day, seeing a person anomalously holding an umbrella, I mean, it is an anomaly. It's just an anomaly that points to a protest rather than a reaction to the weather. So it's meaningless. Now, maybe it's not meaningless, but as far as I know, the most parsimonious explanation for that one is that it's not an important factor, right?
How about Abraham Bolden?
It is hardly. Say that again?
Do you know who Abraham Bolden was?
No,
go ahead.
So Abraham Bolden was the first black Secret Service security guard, and he was in Chicago.
Yeah. That's right. Right.
With basically exposed this whole plot in Chicago that was supposedly happened a week before or shortly before the Dallas assassination, that there was a Chicago JFK plot to kill Kennedy, and he was jailed and put in prison and prevented from testifying about this. And it's just one of those another interesting anomalies, but that's a pretty big one on my radar as far as, was there a plot within, at least somewhere within the government, the mob, mainly the mob connections between Chicago and Dallas that are talked about in some of the investigations with, Johnny Roselli, Sam Giancana, who hated the RFK and the Kennedys, and these guys wanted the Kennedys out, and they wanted to get back into Cuba because Castro came in and kicked out all the casinos. He outlawed gambling there, and so they lost it's like losing the city of Las Vegas for them. They're like, there's tons of money that we're not making anymore. So they were on the side of the CIA and working with a lot of these factors. And then you get into the oil men that hated Kennedy for the oil depletion allowance. That Harold Byrd and Clint Murchison supposedly had this meeting where they were talking about a bunch of anti-Kennedy people there. So there's all these avenues that seems like this just shouldn't be investigated and looked into, and it's too big of a conspiracy. And now you're involving Ruth Paine, who brought the Oswalds from New Orleans to Dallas and gave them a home. Supposedly she was this real nice lady who was just wanted to help people, but there's no evidence of her helping anyone but the Oswalds move to Dallas and get jobs there. And then it turns out her sister worked for the CIA, and all these other connections that came out later with Ruth Paine. Documents came out later that
got out of the archives and stuff. And then there's still like 5,000 documents or something that the government won't release related to the JFK assassination for 7 years later.
Yeah.
So what does that tell you? Like, what could possibly be?
I suspect on that one, I'm pretty sure I know. It's probably something embarrassing that the CIA was up to with some foreign country that is now one of our allies. Because they did do a lot of that kind of stuff, right? So
it's hard. It's hard to imagine, though, Mike. It's hard to imagine this many years later, even if this was something embarrassing against an important ally. The people involved are overwhelmingly dead already.
I don't know.
So the point is a mea culpa in which the American public could finally rest easy that no coup took place in 1963 would be worth it. And yet it doesn't happen.
Well, we're down. But almost all the documents have been released, like 1%.
Well, sure, like but you would look. The only way to get those of us who see the number of anomalies as too high to be credibly explained by Oswald acting alone is complete transparency. And if you're like, well, we'll release 98% of the documents.
I know.
I the 2% you didn't release that would.
I know.
Would be
release
the
them all. I say release them all. I completely agree with you there. Now, so what we're talking about here, bigger picture, signal detection problem. There are conspiracies. They do happen. Foreign leaders have been assassinated. We just saw Putin assassinate Prigozhin, very likely. And it's kind of counter to I've been tweeting since the book came out, never attribute to malice what can be explained by incompetence or chance. And then I reversed it. In the case of Putin, never attribute to chance what can be explained by malice because of his history, right? So the question is, how many elements would have to come together for the conspiracy to be pulled off? And so one of the criteria I present in the book is, we don't know for sure. You're right. I mean, no one has all the information. The anomalies do matter, and the more they pile up, the more interesting the story gets. But in fact, too many of those anomalies actually points to something probably more mundane, in as much as we know how real conspiracies work. It's hard to get people to be at the right place at the right time, to be competent, to keep their mouth shut, and to not chicken out, not change their mind, to not squeal, to not pillow talk with a lover and say, oh, you know what, I was there at 9/11, I was part of it, or I know my best friend was, nothing, that kind of thing happens all the time. Watergate is a classic example. The leader of the free world can't even have his top G-men pull off a break-in. I mean, just G. Gordon Liddy himself says, these people are just incompetent. They can't keep their mouths shut. And
there's
so
an idea that those guys were set up to put Nixon on the hot plate too, because they were involved in the.
Oh yeah.
Because those Watergate burglars, it was Sturgis, it was Howard Hunt, it was guys that were accused of being connected to the JFK assassination. I know Frank Sturgis has been accused of being one of the 3 tramps that were arrested in Dealey Plaza. They arrested these guys and then never booked them, never took their names, and then just let them go. Or someone went and let them go from the police station and then destroyed all the records of them getting arrested. But the news photographer took their pictures, so there was that record at least. And that was pretty curious that those guys.
So I do find the connections, the apparent connections between the JFK assassination and Watergate to be another anomaly that causes me to worry that something more than Oswald acting alone happened in Dealey Plaza. But
then I want to go after
this,
where Nixon was talking about the whole Bay of Pigs thing.
Right. But I want to drill down on this issue you raise, because I hear it all the time, Michael, about the question of how hard it is to get people to stay quiet. And there are 2 points that I think need to be made in response. It is hard, but not impossible, to get people to stay quiet. Things like the Manhattan Project reveal that you can have a very large project with very high levels of secrecy, but I don't even think that's the crucial failure in that point. The crucial failure is it's much easier to get people to stay quiet if you're willing to kill people who don't stay quiet.
Well, Putin does that.
Putin,
I
well,
guess.
sure, but I guess the
example.
point is, logically speaking,
Trump
analytically,
does that.
I think you have to say, under ordinary circumstances, a large conspiracy would tend to out itself because somebody would talk and it would emerge. On the other hand, we do have a pattern of conspicuous failure to thrive of witnesses in the JFK assassination case. And that once you have...
Perfect example would be
First of
Antonio
all-
Vesciana. If you ever heard of Antonio Vesciana, he was talking to Bill O'Reilly, and then he got shot at 3 times. And then the next time they tried to interview him, he's like, not going to talk about this at all.
I don't know about that story. Okay, so here's a counterexample. So, with WikiLeaks, we have millions of classified documents leaked against the government's wishes. Nothing in there about JFK, fake moon landing, 9/11 inside job. You would expect there must be some paper trail of who paid who, what would be leaked out, but there was nothing.
No, I think Jeremy's point from earlier is the salient one, which is that to the extent that you are dealing with competent conspirators, that organizing, the way terrorists use cells in order to keep from being destroyed by a mole, so that cells are insulated from each other so that one cell doesn't reveal another, that would be a rational way of compartmentalizing information so that the revelation of one conspiracy didn't reveal all the others. And, in the case of an assassination, you're dealing with people who are willing to kill. So are they more willing to kill presidents than they are witnesses? That doesn't make any sense. So anyway, I'm not arguing.
The shooters don't even know they're the shooter. The shooters don't even know they're the shooters or what they're doing. That they're given wrong information and told wrong, and they don't even know who's got the bullets.
Yeah, a lot of times that's true. They are siloed, like the Manhattan Project. Not very many people knew everything that was going on.
Right.
Yeah,
Groves did, but yeah.
So all I would say, again, my interest here is not in the JFK assassination. It's not in COVID. It's not in UAPs. It's in grappling with the question of how one rationally deals with a set of circumstances that can be explained by a narrative with which we are presented and can be explained by collusion that would frame that narrative so that it would be saleable.
Okay,
and I believe in the case of collusion, where killing is one of the allegations, one has to back off their skepticism on the basis that somebody would have talked. Because if the pattern was that people who talked got offed and people who realized that they shouldn't talk remained alive, you would get the false appearance that nobody was talking.
Sure, you get an omerta rule, like in the mafia, certainly. Okay, 2 points. One, as a very pious man dies and goes to heaven, and God says, son, you've been a very pious man. I will grant you one wish. I'll answer any question you want. And he goes, I want to know who really shot JFK. And God says, Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone with his Carcano rifle. And the guy goes, this goes even higher than I thought.
It's a good joke. I like it.
The serious point. Here's how I address that issue, Bret, is that I use kind of a Bayesian reasoning approach, starting with Cromwell's rule. Oliver Cromwell famously said, I beseech you in the bowels of Christ, you might be mistaken. Never assign a 0 or 1 to any hypothesis. Yep. Always somewhere between 1 and 99, say. So yes, any of these things are possible. So, so in terms of conspiracies, the way I think about it is, the more people that would have to be involved, the more elements that would have to come together at just the right time, without incompetence or mistakes or chance or randomness interfering with the whole. How many steps have to, come together at just the right place? The less likely the theory is to be true. It's not. It could be. It could be everybody kept their mouth shut. It could be all 27 people were at the right place at the right time. They moved the brain, they planted the bullet, they doctored the autopsy, they used the body double. But, and then they had the Ruth Payne and she got Oswald the job. At some point, though, there's just so many elements. I would say my probability is low.
I think you've got the logic wrong by your own standard. You tell me if
Okay.
I've got this incorrect.
Okay.
What you just said, the more things that have to come together just so, the less likely it is to be the explanation. I believe that forces you to embrace the idea that the moon landing was faked, because the number of things that had to come together to put people on the moon is much greater than the number of things that had to come together to make it look like we put people on the moon, right?
I don't know. You'd have to.
It's easier for Stanley Kubrick to fake that in the studio, for sure. You know?
Totally. 2001 was a good movie. That was some compelling space stuff.
Collimated light. That's the biggest problem there. So.
I have a whole chapter in my book on the assassination of Franz Ferdinand that triggered the First World War, because that was probably the deadliest conspiracy in history. And it really was a conspiracy. You know, this group of Serbian nationalists, you know, were not happy about Austrian politics and so forth. And Franz Ferdinand's the heir apparent. He's going to come to the Sarajevo for this ceremony and blah, blah, blah. He's in a convertible. And they plotted to kill him. And they had like 7 different guys, and they each had to go to a different house to get the weapon, different weapons. They're going to position them on the parade route. And none of it went according to plan. And they still managed to assassinate him just by chance. The guy pulls the pin on the hand grenade and he tosses it at just the right time when the convertible car is coming by, but slightly missed, bounced off the trunk of the car that he was supposed to hit, goes under the car behind him. That car explodes and the people are injured, and the car dashes off. And then he gives a speech in which he kind of upbraids the public for treating him so badly. And then they go back to the hospital to check on the people that were injured. And they go back on the parade route, backwards on the parade route. And then the car makes a wrong turn on this Pelquay road where the assassin was still sitting there. And the car had no reverse. So the driver puts it in neutral and kind of backs up slowly. And there is Princip, one of the assassins, standing right there with his gun, and there's Franz Ferdinand sitting right there in front of him, bam, bam, dead. And, you know, totally unexpected, totally random. And so I use this as an example, is that's how these things usually go.
Yeah,
but not a well-oiled machine, but just, you know, randomness.
Yeah, but what happened in Dallas doesn't look to me like a well-oiled machine. It looks to me like a story that's very like the one you just told. Right?
Yeah.
The failure of caskets to match, the bullet showing up on the stretcher. This looks like something where, look, I don't know what it looks like, but I will say, if it was a conspiracy and the people conspiring understood how complex what they were trying to pull off was, they would have had some sort of how do we take care of loose ends that emerge in the middle of this chaotic event? How do we take care of things we didn't anticipate? This is what that would look like, and it would look imperfect, and it would cause people like me and I think Jeremy to look at the evidence and say, actually, yes, we see the picture that you see, but if we look at a broader swath of the evidence, what it actually looks like is that picture is being deliberately created inside a much richer story. And I would add to that where you stop analyzing evidence is crucial. And in the case of the JFK assassination, I think the 2 most important pieces of evidence are the Lee Harvey Oswald assassination and the Bobby Kennedy assassination. That if this was a coup in which Lee Harvey Oswald was a patsy, then you would have to have those 2 loose ends tied up, because Lee Harvey Oswald was in a position to reveal that something larger happened that day.
Yes.
And Bobby Kennedy was in a position to pick up where John F. Kennedy left off.
Well,
yeah, he himself, right? In the interview, Oswald screams out, "I'm just a patsy," right? So he probably would have talked. The loose ends that you have to cover up too, like how did Oswald get from the school book depository building to where he shot J.D. Tippit in that amount of time? So the time thing is another issue that investigators have struggled with establishing, and they've had to delay the shooting by 19 minutes to give Oswald enough time to even get there to do the shooting, and then the whole issue of
of
Here
the
I'd
evidence that he
recommend-
shot Walker, it comes out 8 days after Ruth Payne gives a book that was supposedly from Oswald's possession, gives it to the Secret Service, and inside that they find the letter that he wrote to Marina, supposedly the night he went to go shoot Walker. Now the cops and the FBI had already, been through his entire bookcase and searched it thoroughly, but then this note shows up. You have things like this that look like planted evidence, literally a chain of the CIA putting these pieces together to give you this one-sided picture of what happened. And yeah, you can't use Occam's razor on something like that because you have a powerful agency actively working to thwart those efforts every step of the way.
Well, here I'd recommend Gerald Posner's book, Case Closed, about Lee Harvey Oswald and his whole history, and tracks all those things you just mentioned. And then the definitive book, what is it? History Restored, I think it is. This is, shoot, I just had mentioned him before. Hang on for a second. It's, right.
I like John Newman's book, Oswald.
Vincent Bugliosi's book. Yeah, it's 1,600 pages. So he deals with he deals with like
nonsense
hundreds of these anomalies.
Unimportant.
But there's people like you that say, "What about this anomaly? What about this?" There's hundreds of these anomalies when you look closely.
So,
at it.
Jeremy, you recommended a book, but I didn't hear what it was.
Oh, that's a book called Oswald and the CIA by John Newman. But also, why don't we go into, we can maybe go into, Mac Wallace is another interesting guy to investigate in the JFK saga. He was apparently LBJ's assassin and a member of Skull and Bones next to George H.W. Bush, who was linked to the assassination through George de Mohrenschildt. I'm surprised that Michael's not already, real familiar with a lot of these topics, researching the JFK assassination. George de Mohrenschildt was a big name. He, of course, shot himself in the back of the head before he could finish testifying to the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and wrote a letter to George H.W. Bush. Had his name, had Bush's name in his directory of contacts, and wrote a letter to him, shortly before he died. And then it's interesting that Bush gets put in charge of the CIA in 1974, just in time for the House Select Committee on Assassinations, that they want to put someone who's outside the agency to clean it up and get to the bottom of this JFK stuff. So they put Bush in charge. And it turns out, that Bush's his oil company was called Zapata Oil, and he ran this oil company that he got from his father, and they had the first offshore oil rigs in the Caribbean Sea, and they were used as staging platforms for the Bay of Pigs operation, which was codenamed Operation Zapata, which was Bush's company. So you have Bush tied into this group of CIA anti-Castro Cubans that, hated Kennedy. And then all these people were in Dallas. Bush was in Dallas, Nixon was in Dallas, and Ford, 3 future presidents all there at the same time. And then Ford was, of course, on the, I think he was head of either the House Select Committee or one of these investigations where
Ford was on the Warren Commission.
The Warren Commission, yeah, he was on the Warren Commission. So, he's rewarded for, his...
And it was called the Warren Commission because of Earl Warren, the Supreme Court justice. I mean, you think they're all in on this?
I don't think that Warren was
Warren?
specifically. I think that Dulles definitely staged that whole thing and controlled and pulled a lot of the strings so that, Earl Warren was blind to it. The same way that I think that, other commissions and investigations have been run into some of these official events. You look at they appoint people in charge who may not be the actual ringleaders of a conspiracy, but they're definitely willing to go along with the narrative on a lot of things often. So I don't know. Earl Warren is definitely suspect, but the Warren Commission, I definitely think that it was a biased and unproductive investigation as far as identifying
potential suspect, other potential suspects.
Man, that's a lot of dot connecting there.
Well, but Michael,
CIA and Bush and Ford and on, all of them. I mean, really?
They're all there.
I don't think you heard Jeremy correctly.
The dots on the map. I know.
Yeah,
but
these are
too many dots.
Too many dots. It depends. It sounds to me, Michael, like you are assuming that the fact of those dots being on the map necessarily leads to the assumption that they were all in on it. And I don't hear that assumption being made. I think the point is those things are anomalies. Could it be a coincidence that George H.W. Bush was in Dallas? Of course. Could it be a coincidence in light of the fact that he seems to be the only adult American who doesn't remember where he was? That's a weird fact.
In his memoirs, he was meeting with a guy named Al Ulmer. His Barbara Bush's memoir, she admits that that week they were meeting with a guy named Al Ulmer, and Al Ulmer was actually an expert in coup d'états. So why was this closet CIA agent meeting with an expert in coup d'états the week before he goes to Dallas? It's just a lot of coincidences.
I mean, coup d'etat, President Johnson, he just extended whatever Kennedy was doing, civil rights acts and so on, all the policies he instituted. They were just pretty much a continuation. And then after Johnson is Nixon. And I mean, what coup d'etat? What government do we have?
Wait, Michael.
We have the same government.
No, you earlier, you cite the fact that Kennedy said he was going to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces.
Well, he just was complaining. They lied to me.
Well, no, but you are now extrapolating beyond what we know, to the extent that what took place after Kennedy's assassination was that nobody broke the CIA into 1,000 pieces. It is possible. One rational explanation is that the CIA, in an act of self-preservation, assassinated a president and caused that piece of the agenda to change. That's one possibility. I'm not saying that story happened. I'm not saying there's evidence for it, but I'm saying it is not preposterous that the desired policy change did occur and that we are now witness to it because the CIA still exists.
Right. But presidents say stuff like this all the time. I heard RFK Jr. say if he gets elected president, he's going to close all 900 military bases around the world. No, he's not. This is not going to happen. Right.
No.
The military industrial complex, not going to let this happen. Just in the same way that Obama said, if I get elected, I'm going to close Gitmo and we're going to pull the troops out. And then, so here's my concession to a conspiracy theory. When you get elected president, they take you in the back room and they go, okay, here's what's actually going on in the world. Oh, I can't pull the troops out. No, of course you can't do that. I can't close Gitmo. No, you can't close Gitmo. This is why. Oh, all right. But I told everybody I would. Yeah, don't worry about that. I mean, I think that's just kind of real politics, right? It's just kind of the dirty business of how things actually operating.
Of course. Now, did you guys want to discuss MK Ultra? Did I get that sense from you?
Have you ever heard of a guy named Dr. William J. Bryan before?
Yes, I must have come across that name in the book on MK Ultra.
I don't think I know the name.
Because you mentioned you read the book on MK Ultra, but you didn't find the meat and potatoes there, and I'm surprised because William J. Bryan, he was a very interesting guy. He pioneered a lot of the work on hypnosis. And he's allegedly,
okay, right.
Bryan is allegedly the doctor that programmed Sirhan Sirhan. In fact, he bragged about being responsible for that at one point in his life, that he had been the MK Ultra doctor that had hypnotized Sirhan Sirhan to, fire it at RFK. RFK must die. So this is this is interesting that the CIA was doing some very risque things with mind control, and then I guess this somehow, like these overlapping connections. So somehow this guy ends up. I don't know if it's William J. Bryan, but one of these guys ends up
being the psychologist who gives Jack Ruby his mental evaluation for is an MK Ultra doctor. So it's kind of like, it's interesting how they have their doctors, they have people in the police department even, apparently, according to a lot of the investigations that were done, there was a mole in the police force in the Los Angeles police force, this guy, Pina, and Manuel Pina was basically was a CIA agent, and he was in charge of the investigation into RFK's murder for the LAPD. And they're the ones that lost that panel with the extra bullet holes that were in the log by the FBI. So there's extra bullet holes, extra gunshots. You got the guy who followed and walked RFK into the kitchen, who's testified about him. You know, he's come out and he was actually at Sirhan's parole hearing trying to get him freed because he doesn't believe that Sirhan fired the shot that actually killed RFK. He thinks that it was the security guard, Eugene Caesar, who had followed him into the pantry, and that, you know, it was
the investigators did a whole investigation of him, and they concluded that there wasn't enough evidence to try him.
So hold on, Michael, though. Again, if there was a conspiracy to kill RFK, then you have to build into that model that it would include enough firepower, to use the wrong analogy, to disrupt a proper investigation, which would then result in difficult to explain anomalies like a door frame that appears to contain the evidence that there were more bullets than Sirhan had in his gun, that door frame disappearing mysteriously under the control of the LAPD. I mean, just think for a moment, how hard is it to lose a door frame? I can imagine misfiling it, but I can't imagine, oh my God, the door frame is gone, and it doesn't occur to somebody that there's an extra door frame leaning up somewhere, right? It's hard to imagine. And so you would expect an anomaly like that, because if there is a door frame that indicates that there are more bullets than there were, I believe Sirhan's gun contained 8 chambers. If there was a door frame that suggested more than 8 bullets were fired, then that would in and of itself establish that there must be some other shooter that is being sought. So it would have to disappear, and that would result in a persistent anomaly that 50 plus years later we would still be talking about, right? So I guess the point is, Michael, I hear you repeatedly saying, but there was an investigation, and here's the logical path that investigation concluded is the most parsimonious explanation for the assassination. And the allegation that there may have been collusion beyond that assumes an explanation like the one you present, and then says, but that if we zoom out and we look at a larger collection of evidence, actually it's not the most parsimonious explanation anymore. So it's built in.
Maybe. You know, gentlemen, I mean, again, it's the hindsight bias, and you're just going, okay. I mean, it's like if Trump got shot, people would be going, okay, all right, who could have been involved? Well, we better check out Stormy Daniels and Cohen and all the people that hated him and would have wanted him dead and so on. But that hasn't happened. So we don't care about whatever they're doing. So in hindsight, we look back and go, something's weird, something's off here, maybe. And, you know, the proportionality bias, we want big, important people that die to have big, important causes of their death. You know, the Holocaust, worst thing that ever happened, the Nazis, worst political regime in history. There's a balance there. You know, Princess Diana, cause of death, you know, drunk driving, speeding, no seatbelt. Yeah, but princesses can't die the way, regular people died. There must have been, the the MI6 or the, the royal family or the Arabs, somebody had to be behind this. Same thing with JFK, RFK, MLK, also conspiracy theories about his assassination. Yeah, and anybody that's big and important like that. 9/11, just you're telling me 19 guys with box cutters pulled off 9/11? Impossible. Had to be operatives inside the Bush administration, and then you go down that rabbit hole.
Well, so wait, let's go to the MLK one, because I think actually it's quite telling. In the MLK case, you have, again, a mainstream narrative, an investigation that concludes a mainstream narrative, but you also, and I'm going to be quickly out of my depth here, maybe one or the other of you knows the information that I don't, but in a civil trial, it was actually established not beyond reasonable doubt, but by a preponderance of the evidence that there was governmental involvement in the assassination of RFK. I mean, not RFK, MLK.
Yeah.
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 So what that tells you is it tells you where we are in logical space, that there is a tension between, in this case, it's a question of thresholds of evidence. The evidence gets above the threshold of a preponderance, but not to the level of satisfying an investigation that leans more towards beyond a reasonable doubt, right? Just as we were with OJ.
Mm-hmm.
So that tells you in logical space that this is a question of thresholds of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that in all of these cases, thresholds of evidence and burdens of proof are really the key things that one has to track in order to analytically be consistent and to follow the evidence where it leads.
Right. So Bayesian reasoning, preponderance of evidence is 50% plus a feather, just we're just above it. And the reason the criminal court system has a higher standard of evidence is because of Blackwell's ratio, 10-1. Better 10 guilty people go free than that one innocent person be convicted. Therefore, we're going to have a much higher standard beyond a reasonable doubt, and so on. And again, if you put one of these people on trial, MLK had, hundreds of death threats. I don't know, every year, month, or whatever. I mean, just lots of people wanted him dead.
Even the FBI wrote to him and told him to commit suicide, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Right, exactly.
To clarify that for the audience, I'm not sure they heard you, Jeremy. The FBI wrote to MLK and attempted to induce him to kill himself on the basis that he would be embarrassed by evidence they would reveal of his infidelity, I believe, if he did not comply.
I mean, one of the reasons we know so much about MLK's life is because the FBI taped his life. They taped all his phone calls for years. So we know who said what to when they orchestrated this march or that protest. We know the details thanks to FBI. And yeah, it's astonishing. So, I'll grant you that. The COINTELPRO, and it wasn't just MLK. I mean, they infiltrated the Native American civil rights groups and feminist groups and so on. There's stories about there were more FBI agents at these protest meetings than there were protesters. And the joke was you could tell because they had the hippie clothes, but they were wearing wingtips. Something like, I don't know if that's actually true, but yeah, so of course they could have done it. I mean, the FBI could have been involved in the assassination of MLK. I mean, certainly Hoover hated him and truly believed, apparently, that not just MLK, but most of these civil rights leaders were a real threat to American democracy and peace and stability and so on. So sure.
So, okay. But, again, the question is what to conclude from these things. But you've raised COINTELPRO. You've raised MK Ultra. In the case of MK Ultra, I believe there are connections not only to Sirhan, but to Ted Kaczynski. And maybe even, am I right that Manson is also implicated?
Yeah, there's a book, I forget the name of it, I just read it 2 years ago, so I forget the name, but about the connection between Manson and the MK Ultra program and Ted Kaczynski as well. But it was disappointing at the end. He never got a smoking gun. It's a journalist. And he tracked the story for like 30 years. And he thought, I'm really going to get this. And he really dove deep into it. At the end, so I just couldn't get the smoking gun.
Okay, so no smoking gun, but at the very least, it is conspicuous that you have 3 notorious murderers
Yes.
who appear to have a connection to a CIA program of mind control involving hallucinogens.
Yeah, it's one of the curious things is how Manson got his followers to actually commit the murders. He wasn't even there. And so the theory is that he used mind control techniques and drugs, and sex and power and so on to get these women and Tex Watson to commit the murders. That's the theory. Not implausible. I mean, it is weird. He was able to do that, but cult leaders are able to get followers to do all kinds of crazy things.
Okay.
Witness Jonestown or the Heaven's Gate or any of these people.
How about, again, my point here isn't about Manson or Kaczynski or Sirhan or JFK, MLK, COVID.
Mark David Chapman?
It's about how
Mark David Chapman shoots John Lennon and then starts reading The Catcher in the Rye. Just, there's no logic to it.
Almost like he's participating in the construction of a narrative. But let's put it this way. I think one of the things that is very frustrating if one tries to be analytically consistent and rigorous in this space is that we get dismissed on the basis that that is a conspiracy theory and therefore it is wrong. When MK Ultra is a conspiracy, obviously involving a CIA which wishes to use mind control. Does it end at the point that the program is revealed and formally put to bed? I don't know. But
no, unfortunately, in that case, most of the records were destroyed.
Oh, what a shame.
This came out in the Frank Olson case. Frank Olson was the CIA operative who killed himself or was pushed or something weird in a New York high-rise after he was dosed with LSD. And the government under Ford administration paid the family, I think, $750,000 to just basically, let's say, go away and let's put an end to the story. Yeah, it's weird.
So
sure.
can't we agree that the folks who do not deserve a place in the conversation are the people who reflexively dismiss something because it is a so-called conspiracy theory?
Oh, for sure. One of the things I try to do in my book is to get rid of that pejorative. To call something a conspiracy theory means it's bullshit. No, there are conspiracies all over the place all the time. They happen and everybody knows that. So having a theory that one of them might be going on is completely legitimate, of course.
Not only that, but we know there is debate over the meaning of the memo, but the CIA introduces this term as a mechanism for getting rid of hypotheses about the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
That's true, yes.
And so the fact that it became a pejorative isn't even organic in itself.
I know, exactly,
So anyway, look, I think this is super productive. We've gotten to a place where we recognize that in all of these cases so far, there is at least something to be rationally discussed. There is no side that is so preposterous that it is dismissible out of hand. In each case, there is a frustrating lack of a clear evidentiary boundary that tells us one way or the other what is most parsimonious, and that rational people can have such a discussion and can reach different conclusions. That's big progress as far as I'm concerned.
Ditto. I think so too. So the question then becomes, how can we drill down and get an answer? Maybe we can't always get an answer. That's certainly always on the table. But like to the previous point about vaccines, somebody surely knows the answer to this. Okay, let's talk to that person. And so if we can't talk about it, then where are we? Nowhere. We have to talk about it.
Agreed. So I wonder if we ought not push our luck and go even farther in the direction of ideas that are not discussed in polite company.
Uh-oh.
Well, yeah. Well, maybe we could.
I'm pretty much not cancelable. So go ahead. What
are we going to get
trans
canceled?
movement or what?
There's certain topics I feel like if we bring them up, we might get shut down or canceled.
I am pre-canceled.
Pre-canceled. It's
Yes,
a pre-canceling.
I have been canceled and resurrected. So anyway, I think we are beyond cancellation. Well, I wondered if we might not talk a little bit. You raised it several times already, Michael, about the 9/11 question.
Yeah.
And how one is to think about it. I admit that I find this a frustrating topic because, again, I see a pattern of anomalies that refuse to dissipate on inspection. I know that some anomalies should be expected. I think the number of anomalies is too high, which doesn't tell me anything about what did or didn't take place. But
why is it high? And it's because this is the biggest thing that's happened since the JFK assassination in our country. Okay. That's why. So it's everybody is examining every little minute detail. To me, it's a distraction. The theory that it was an inside job by the Bush administration is a distraction from the real conspiracy theories. Like who funded the Saudi operatives? Why do we have this relationship with the Saudi government? And, how is it that those family members were able to leave the country the next day? Those are the kinds of things that if there's an inside anything, it's kind of more of the real politics of how our relationships with some of these foreign countries are pretty questionable.
But some of the anomalies aren't little things that got unearthed because people are looking very carefully at every detail.
Like what?
Well, it's a cliche at this point, but the way Building 7 falls doesn't make any sense to me as somebody.
Yeah, it does. I think so. And who also knows? The insurance companies that had to pay off. They investigated this. If they could have shown something behind it all, they wouldn't have had to pay.
No, again, I think you have to.
I think because the insurance companies that insured the buildings and the tenants on 9/11, do you know who that was? It was AIG.
I forget now who that was.
So AIG was convicted in 2008 of running reinsurance scams where they basically were reselling the bad insurance policies so that other insurance companies would take the hit. So they never investigated what happened on 9/11 with the insurance in the World Trade Center, but the insurance companies that actually held those policies didn't pay out. Someone else took the hit, and they were never investigated for that. So that right there is a huge red flag. You know who Cornelius Vanderstar was? He's the guy that founded AIG. There's a whole book about them called The Secret Insurance Men and how the CIA used AIG to know what factories to bomb, to know what where the money was flowing in a lot of these countries. It was a great source of intelligence. The insurance.
So here's a picture from my book of a piece of American Airlines flight that hit the Pentagon.
Yeah.
So we know that the planes hit the Pentagon. We see the videos, unless the videos are supposedly fake. But here's a piece of in color. You can see it's the American Airlines logo.
Oh yeah, I've seen the
right
picture.
there on the lawn of the Pentagon. So how did the planes hit the Pentagon and the World Trade Center buildings? Who made that happen if it wasn't the hijackers? And how did they do that? Where's the passengers?
There was a drill for a plane hitting the Pentagon called MASCAL, the mass casualty drill. It was an exercise for a plane hitting the Pentagon, and the person in charge of that for the Pentagon was a guy named Charles Burlingame, who ended up being the pilot on Flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon that day. Now, the flight on that flight, there should have been I think like 300 passengers, 400 passengers that fit. There were only 180 passengers on the flight and only 200 people in that wing of the Pentagon that were killed because the wing of the Pentagon that they struck had recently been refurbished and had undergone a $258 million contract in that specific wing of the Pentagon. So a lot of the offices were moved out, and surprisingly, none of the workers were there when the attack happened. So none of the AMEC employees actually died in the Pentagon attack. But there are a lot of interesting anomalies there. For example, the people that did die in the Pentagon, the offices that were left in that area and not moved out were a lot of Pentagon accounting offices and financial accounting offices, and people have drawn suspicion about Rumsfeld the day before saying that there was missing trillions and that the people who were tracking that money down got targeted the next day, whereas terrorists would
likely have targeted the north wing of the Pentagon where the command center is, and not, the recently refurbished wing. So that's an interesting anomaly right
Okay,
there.
this is all interesting. Let me ask you some just easy, big questions. So we saw the planes hit the World Trade Center buildings.
Yeah.
And we saw the exact floors that they hit at an angle, and that the buildings collapsed from that point down. How would the inside job operators know ahead of time which floors exactly to plant the explosive devices, because that's where the planes are going to hit?
Well, actually, the first plane on 9/11 crashed into the 93rd floor of the North Tower, which is right where Paul Bremer's offices were. Now, Paul Bremer was the head of Marsh & McLennan Companies, right? And he was also the director of counter-terrorism for Harvard.
I don't care who's on the floor. How did they know to hit floor 93, and how could they even aim it that perfect at an angle?
Well, if you're on the floor,
it's not obvious to me that.
Sorry, if
it's not obvious to me.
Sorry, go ahead.
Right, go ahead, Jeremy.
Well, I'm just saying.
Sorry, there's a delay on your thing, Jeremy.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well, he said he's not concerned with who worked in that zone, but he wants to know who could have done this. Well, you should be concerned with who worked in those buildings and the security in those buildings and who managed the security in those buildings. Have you ever investigated that? You seem curious about it.
Well, okay, so here's my point.
Because I've seen your video.
Hit those buildings. How you see my the truthers where they all signed a non-disclosure agreement. Okay, this was somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but the larger question would be, you could see the buildings collapsing. If they planted explosive devices in there, how would they know exactly which floors to put the explosive devices before the planes, days, weeks before the planes even took off?
So it's not obvious to me that that's a question that needs an answer.
Yeah.
It is the question that needs an answer.
So
there may be an answer. It's not obvious to me that you need one, because
I know the answer.
Look, I'm no expert in demolition, but you could imagine that there were explosives on all the floors, and that the triggering was arranged after the empirical fact of the airplane. So, but I do want Jeremy to answer that question, but I also want to point out, I said it didn't make sense to me. Hold on, we're going to come back to that. But I said it didn't make sense to me how Building 7 fell, and you said, of course it made sense, and then immediately changed the subject. But,
sorry.
So anyway, I want Jeremy to answer your question, and then I want to come back to my question.
Okay,
Jeremy.
So you remember in 1993 there was a bombing in the World Trade Center?
Yeah.
And the FBI investigated that. Well, they had to make some repairs to that bombed out section of the parking garage and that whole corner of the building where it had all the stuff taken out. Now, the company that was hired to do that was a company called Tridata Corporation. Now, Tridata Corporation is a subsidiary of another company called Systems Planning Corporation International, which was run by the third in control of the Pentagon that day, a guy named Dov Zakheim. And Tridata Corporation would have been given in 1993 access to all the World Trade Center's blueprints and all of the engineering diagrams to be able to conduct those repairs to the damaged leg of the World Trade Center that was damaged during the 93 bombing. So presumably, they would have had access to all of that through their connections, because they're the ones who did the investigation of that and the engineering repairs to the World Trade Center. And it's also interesting that company, Systems Planning Corporation International, they developed this AWACS flight termination control technology, which was able to do autopilot, GPS augmented autopilot commands for aircraft. It's an early autopilot controller, but they could basically install this on the planes and fly them completely through remote command, remote automation, or a pre-programmed series of waypoints. So
what happened to the pilots and all the passengers?
Well, it's, if you can't control the plane, how are you going to, and you can't make cell phone calls? I don't know.
They did make cell phone calls. The family members got cell phone calls from them.
Yeah, those
who made those calls if they couldn't make those?
Yeah.
You think they're fake?
They had
Well,
voice.
I got to tell you, Mike. Michael, that those cell phone calls have never made much sense to me.
But family members
Mark
talk to
Bingham,
their
he
loved
says, "Hi,
ones
Mom,
just
this is
before they
Mark
died.
Bingham."
Who were they
But
talking to?
Aren't we right back where we were with UAPs, where none of us here are convinced by things that are easily accounted for by readily available technology? Right. In other words,
you think the Bush administration made fake phone calls?
I don't think. No.
They had
First of all,
voice
I haven't said anything about the Bush administration. All I have said is that the phone calls don't make sense to me. The making of phone calls in 2001 from a plane, calls that did not frustratingly drop almost instantly, does not add up.
Well, that's the theory, but that's been tested, and they can make those. They could have made some of those calls. In any case, who were the family members talking to? Are these just fake voices?
No. But see, I was much happier with this conversation a few minutes ago because, Michael, you are now trying to get me or Jeremy to answer questions rather than to recognize that there is a pattern of evidence that doesn't completely add up.
Well, but these are important questions.
No, they're not. They're not important. They're not important questions.
A family member talks to her husband, and he's, we're hijacked. We're going to die. Oh my God, I love you, and then boom, gone.
No, Michael.
Okay, who was she talking to?
I'm not telling you. My position is I don't know what happened on 9/11. Okay, I don't know if it was a conspiracy or not. However, I do know that the numbers of things that I can see that don't add up is too large to be easily dismissed. And so I am not capable of answering these questions because I don't have privileged information about what took place. But I will tell you this. If there was some sort of a conspiracy to create the impression of the mainstream narrative on 9/11, then the idea that a component of it involving person X that I don't know, talking to person Y that I don't know in some way I don't understand is not outside of the scale. If we're talking about buildings that behave in ways that don't make sense, then the idea of phone calls that don't quite add up is small potatoes.
Yeah. Okay, Osama bin Laden said he did it. He's proud of it. They said he'd try again, and he did.
Again, there's the deep fake.
Is he lying?
No, there was a younger Osama bin Laden
again
on the tape. The origins of the tape.
You're trying to get me to answer questions when my point is the number of anomalies here is high.
Okay,
right?
I have a quick question for Jeremy. The blueprint. Back to the blueprints. So, are you suggesting that operatives broke through the drywall and got into where the support beams are in the 2 World Trade Center buildings, and no one noticed them doing this?
Elevator shafts. Lots of people noticed. Scott Forbes reported power downs. William Rodriguez, the head janitor, reported workers in the building making loud noises in the elevator shafts. There was an ACE elevator renovation of the elevator shafts that took place before 9/11. It was reported in Elevator Weekly magazine, I believe. I have the article somewhere. I could send it to you.
There's a magazine called Elevator Weekly. I didn't even know that.
Of course,
I'm a lifelong subscriber to Elevator Weekly.
All right.
But apparently
just out of curiosity, if it wasn't Al Qaeda, who do you think was behind it?
Well, the first pronouncement of the official story, as we're saying, where did the official story first come from? So the first person to tell us that it was Osama bin Laden on television that day was a guy named Paul Bremer on MSNBC that morning. Now, Paul missed work. He showed up late on a flight and wasn't able to get to work in the World Trade Center, where I mentioned he worked on the 93rd floor. Was his office right where the first plane struck on 9/11. Paul Bremer went on to become the Iraq occupation governor. So he basically led the whole invasion of Iraq. And he was never, investigated for any ties to terrorism. Of course, he lost a lot of coworkers in that building. And, it's
Noam Chomsky got very defensive when I, accused him of being a potential conspirator, and if there was one. But he draws a lot of red flags for me because he's
Noam
connected.
Chomsky, what?
Yeah, I had asked Noam Chomsky about this because Noam's a big disbeliever in 9/11 stuff. So I asked him, and his response was, "Well, who did it? Who's responsible then? Who on the inside, could have done it?" When I said Bremer, he said, "Oh, that's the most ridiculous thing. It would have been the worst decision he could have ever made in his entire career. How could you possibly think that he could have been involved and whatnot?" But it's interesting that Bremer's involved in this. It goes back to this continuity of government group that Cheney and Rumsfeld were both involved in. And this continuity of government. Before we get into that continuity of government group, I just want to play for you guys really quickly that the clip.
We want to turn now to a guest who is joining us in the studio. It's Paul Bremer.
So this is the first time that 9/11 was mentioned on TV the morning of 9/11, and I just want to play this clip with freedom of fair use. People need to see this for context.
Want to make sure I'm getting your name right because I'm just meeting you just at this moment. You're a terrorism expert,
counterterrorism. I hope,
and can talk to us a little bit about who could. I mean, there are a limited number of groups who could be responsible for something of this magnitude.
Yes, this is a very well planned, very well coordinated attack, which suggests it's very well organized centrally. And there are only 3 or 4 candidates in the world, really, who could have conducted this attack.
Bin Laden comes to mind right away, Mr. Bremer.
Indeed, he certainly does. Bin Laden was involved in the first attack on the World Trade Center, which had as its intention doing exactly what happened here, which was to collapse both towers. He certainly has to be a prime suspect, but there are others in the Middle East, and there are at least 2 states, Iran and Iraq, which should at least remain on the list of potential suspects.
What kind of coordination how could something like this be put together?
Well, you'd have to have, first of all, you've got to find some people who are willing to die, which is not that easy. And then, of course, they have to find ways around what we thought was pretty good security at our airports. We haven't had a hijacking in a long time, let alone 4. So there had to have been some very good coordination there. There has to have been coordination in the whole planning of the attack. The people, if they were not Americans, had to get visas to get into the United States. They needed false identities probably to buy airplane tickets. They needed cars to get to the airport. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff that had to happen here.
Go ahead.
Well, with as many resources as our government and our allies' governments around the world devote to studying terrorism and knowing what's going on and what they're planning, you have to wonder how something of this magnitude, how this could take place without any warning or any hint that it was coming.
First of all, the intelligence against terrorists is the hardest intelligence there is to gather. Basically, you have to have a spy in the terrorist group who's willing to talk to you for whatever reason. It's the hardest intelligence there is. The National Commission on Terrorism, which I chaired last year, made as our key recommendation a much more vigorous effort to try to get terrorist spies as informing on their colleagues to us. Every time there's a major terrorist attack, it is automatically, of course, an intelligence failure. That's by definition. But I'm sympathetic to the problem about how you get good intelligence on these people. It's not easy. There is an intelligence failure here. There is a massive security failure where we have 4 airplanes being hijacked in the same morning, 2 from Dulles Airport, it appears. So there's a lot of lessons that are going to have to be learned. But first, we've got to find out who did it.
Mr. Bremer, I want to speak to that for a second. When the Oklahoma City incident occurred, the immediate response from a lot of people was that it came from some Arab terrorist group. Is there any reason why we ought to be cautious about that kind of an assumption on this particular incident, on these incidents?
Well, of course. What you have to work with at this stage, since we don't have any hard intelligence apparently, and we don't have any forensic evidence, is motivations and capabilities. And so when I list 4 potential groups, I'm working mostly from motivations and proven capabilities in the past. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean that you can exclude that some other kind of group could have come out of nowhere and done this, but at least as a working hypothesis in the first chaotic hours here after this attack, you have to start somewhere, and you have to start with what you know about the past, and which groups have motives.
One of the things that the president said today from Florida early on was that the United States will respond to this, and he left it at that. Is it to be assumed that the first thing that we have to figure out is to identify precisely who it is we're going to respond against?
Of course. Basically, we have sort of a 4-stage operation here. First, we've got to hope and help that we can save as many people as possible, stabilize the situation in the Pentagon and in New York. Secondly, we need to get to work on trying to identify the perpetrators. And then thirdly, we come to the question about retaliation. And fourthly, which goes along all along at the same time, is what are the lessons we learned? What did we learn about the intelligence failure? What did we learn about the security failure? And how do we move forward in the future on those areas?
I don't recall anything like this. Pearl Harbor happened a month before I was born, and I hear my parents talk about that as a seminal event in their lives all the time. I am not aware of anything like this in the United States before. Americans are now, I think it's fair to say, really scared. Should we be?
This is a day that will change our lives, isn't it?
It is a day that will change our lives. It's a day when the war that the terrorists declared on the United States, and after all, they did declare war on us, has been brought home to the United States in a much more dramatic way than we've seen before. So it will change our lives. I do think it's important, and I'm sure the president and his colleagues, when they start talking about this, it's important to hit some balance. The American way of life is not threatened by these people unless we threaten it ourselves. If we start throwing away the democratic freedoms and the civil liberties that are at the heart of our society, that's what they're after. And that's what we can't allow to have happen. And we've got to go about our business. People have got to move around. I was diverted on a plane this morning. I was trying to get to New York and wound up in Baltimore. And I in a way, was sort of at least relieved to see business as usual going on among people. We have to go on with our lives. It's not to say we don't take it seriously. We take it very seriously. But it's not something where we can all jump in a foxhole somewhere and hope the world doesn't come and bother us. We have to find a balanced response, one that makes it absolutely clear, as the president said this morning, that we're not going to tolerate this act of war. This will have consequences for the people who did it. I hope, very severe consequences. I hope the most severe military response we can come up with. But we also have to remember that we've got a way of life to protect, and that this doesn't threaten. This is not an existential threat to the United States.
All right. Paul Bremer, thank you.
We appreciate it, Mr. Bremer. Thank you very much.
We should make it clear that there has been no claim of responsibility at this point for any of these events.
Yeah. Susan,
want to point out, I said it didn't make sense to me. Hold on, we're going to come back to that. But I said it didn't make sense to me how Building 7 fell. And you said, of course it made sense, and then immediately changed the subject. But,
sorry.
So anyway, I want Jeremy to answer your question, and then I want to come back to my question.
Okay.
Jeremy.
So you remember in 1993, there was a bombing in the World Trade Center?
Yep.
And the FBI investigated that. Well, they had to make some repairs to that bombed out section of the parking garage and that whole. Yeah, we already saw this. So I'm going to find the spot that we were just at. We're still on 9/11.
On purpose. Okay. So I coined a new term called cowhop, capitalized on what happened on purpose. And my analogy with a few general.
And fortunately, where was the part with Paul Bremer, man? No, I can't. Now we're not there. I just wanted to stop and play that one part with Paul Bremer, and then it rewinded to a part that we already played.
Analogy with Pearl
Drive file in it. He talks about it, and all that in the years before.
Forgotten, but there's a long list of interesting things that were in Building 7. Had a piece of Building 7 in which the desk responsible for investigating Osama bin Laden was housed?
Watch this again. No, I've never heard that. I've heard that they had the Securities and Exchange Commission were in that office. They had the El Dorado Task Force office in Building 6, which was an interagency money laundering watchdog group that reported that their vaults were actually broken into and raided before the towers came down, like early that morning. So there's this interesting anomaly there that maybe that
money laundering watchdog group was targeted. I've also heard of a guy named Richard Andrew Grove, who was working for a company called Silverstream International in the World Trade Center, and found evidence of some of this Fortune 500 accounting software having, a faulty drive file in it. He talks about it in some of his interviews and stuff. But he was told to bring all his evidence of this to a meeting on the 93rd floor of the World Trade Center on the morning of 9/11. And fortunately, he was late. But it's just, he thinks that basically the people who were responsible for this, that he had stumbled across some kind of accounting thing in their software. And when they had tried to basically get him to bring all his evidence to this meeting where he would have met his fate. Interesting anomalies with that kind of stuff. Then the security companies. Okay, I want to let Michael.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. No, Michael wanted to make a comment.
Well, yeah, and I'm going to have to run here in a few minutes. Let me just make a few general comments about this. So, in 9/11 truther circles, there's two things called MIHOP and LIHOP. MIHOP is made it happen on purpose. LIHOP is let it happen on purpose. The debate is, did Bush know it was going to happen and let it happen because this, for whatever his motive, or did he actually make it happen on purpose? Okay. So I coined a new term called CowHop, capitalized on what happened on purpose. And my analogy with Pearl Harbor, for example, sometimes 9/11 is called the new Pearl Harbor, is there were conspiracy theories after Pearl Harbor that Roosevelt either knew it was going to happen and let it happen, or he actually orchestrated some of it and made it happen on purpose. But in fact, the way politicians really work is they capitalize on what happened. So, Roosevelt famously wanted to get the United States into the war. Churchill was begging him to get involved in the war, and he just couldn't. He couldn't get the support of Congress. The American First movement was very strong. The general public was not behind it after the debacle of World War I and our involvement there. So, but once Pearl Harbor happened, then everybody was behind it. So he capitalized on what happened on purpose. And there's memos, like the famous August 9th, 2001 memo from Condoleezza Rice, Osama bin Laden to attack the United States on U.S. soil. How could the Bush administration not respond to it just a month before? But in fact, there were thousands of pieces of intel that Al Qaeda was doing this, they were doing that, attacking our bases here. They were going to do attack over there. They're going to do a bombing, suicide. But same thing with Pearl Harbor. Roosevelt had thousands of pieces of intel about the Japanese are going to do this, the Japanese are going to do that. There was so much intel they couldn't sort through what to make of it all. After the fact, you go back and go, oh look, there's that piece of intel right there on Roosevelt's desk that they were going to attack in Hawaii. It was Hawaii. He knew it was going to happen. No, in hindsight, yes. But no. So Bush famously, wanted to finish the job of his father, in Iraq. So, obviously there was no reason to do that until 9/11. And then it's like, now's my chance. So then all this stuff you have about, the whole Bush administration, that then falls into place on the capitalized on what happened. Hey, good. Halliburton and Cheney and Rumsfeld and the whole gang, of course, yes, they did capitalize on what happened. They profited from it. It was a needless war. And on all of that is true, without having the conspiracy in the first place. It's a different kind of conspiracy.
Sure. Look,
sure,
I
but
think
you
it is
can also
unquestionable that they capitalized.
Yeah.
Whether there is anything beyond that. But it sounds to me like you've got to go, and I do not want to let the Building 7 question go. It's the one I cannot see past.
Okay, I'll just give you a few, and I'll address a few more of these anomalies. I got a few minutes. I have to take my dog to the vet. So first of all, Building 7 burned all day. And so it was usually the pictures you see are of the backside where there doesn't look like there's much damage. On the other side, it was totally destroyed from all the debris that hit it and burned all day and so on. And the fire crews were there. They were monitoring it, watching it. And finally they said, pull it. The head of the owner of the building, pull it. He just meant pull the fire team out of there before it collapses. Then it collapses. Anyway, I never thought that was so unusual. But let me just hit a few more of these other anomalies.
Wait. No. You did not address my point. Okay. I didn't say I don't know why it fell down. I said I can't explain why it fell down the way that it did.
It looks to look if you Google on YouTube, if you Google on YouTube, explosive, demolish buildings and the way that they look like they fall. That's what it does. Neither the World Trade Center buildings nor Building 7, particularly the World Trade Center buildings, explosive.
They don't look like a standard controlled demolition. Doesn't mean it doesn't mean that it doesn't look like a conceivable one, but it doesn't look like a standard controlled demolition at all.
Right. No.
Building 7 is different. And here's the thought experiment I would put to you. The reason that this particular piece of the puzzle will not let me go is that if I grant you, hey, it burned all day, it burned way hotter than we know. Maybe there was something stored in it that caused it to burn in a way that would actually bring down a steel frame building like that, and nobody has admitted that it was stored there. Let's grant all that. The way it falls is something gives way first, and it partially falls, or it slumps over, or it twists, or something like that. It doesn't just suddenly descend in the way that it's captured on video from multiple angles doing. Right? That, to me, is the problem. That even if I say I can accept that it fell as a result of the unusual amount of damage that happened that day and the amount of fire that was unknown and fires burning at a temperature that doesn't make sense to me but has some rational explanation that isn't the result of collusion, I still cannot in my mind get to the point where it falls in the pristine way that I watch it fall in those videos.
Okay, I don't want to read to you 4 pages from my book, but we consulted a guy named Blanchard who runs a company called Protect, Brent Blanchard, and his company is called Protect Documentation Services, a company that documents the work of building demolition contractors. Anyway, so he destroys buildings for a living, right? So he gave us here's the claims from the truthers, here's his explanation for it. For building World Trade Center Building 7, he talks about it burning all day and so on. What about that it was intentionally pulled down by explosives? The building owner himself was quoted as saying he decided to pull it. This guy's answer to that is, building owners do not have the authority over emergency personnel at a disaster scene. Demolition experts have never heard "pull it" used to refer to an explosive demolition. Demolition explosive experts anticipated the collapse of World Trade Center 7, and they also witnessed it from a few hundred feet away. No one heard any detonations.
I think that's a lie, because there are videos of demolition experts using the term "pull it." Also, it seems more likely to me he would have said the term "pull them" rather than "pull it" if you're referring to
the team, the team of people.
It's just kind of confusing. Yeah, I don't think that Larry had the authority to make that call, and I don't. The fact that he would say that is sort of out of place and an anomaly in and of itself. But
the person we consulted that knows about
that's outside the scope of evidence that maybe something did in fact happen. Because you remember your article for Scientific American, you wrote there was no melted steel, and you repeat that claim in very big letters very many times on there. But there were a number of FEMA firefighters, a number of people, even I have the architect for the World Trade Center, Leslie Robertson, who visited the site very early on, saying that there were streams of liquid metal trickling like you were in a foundry. Very descriptive words and terminology, which imply that steel was melted. Then you have things like Appendix C of the FEMA report, where you have a Firewise science professor, Dr. Jonathan Barnett, who did the only known study that was done of metallurgical analysis of any steel from the towers. And directly in that report, he says that they found, chemical sulfide eutectics, which basically is something you add to steel, which lowers the melting point of the steel. And also they found evidence of, that looks like corrosion and melting of the steel. And he recommended further investigation to find out what caused that.
Now, a couple of skeptics like Dr. Grenier have suggested that the gypsum drywall, caused the sulfidation of the steel that created that sulfide eutectic. And so we performed some experiments where we burned all kinds of stuff on some I-beams with a bunch of gypsum board and tried to get the gypsum to infuse and produce these same kind of eutectics. And we were not able to do that in any of our experiments. So it's just, it seems like there's a lot of scientific obfuscation on the behalf of, forensic investigators who kept a lot of people out of the site, limited access to the site. Kurt Sonnenfeld, the FEMA photographer, testifying that they took most of his photographs and wouldn't allow any of this stuff to be published, and that the photographs contain almost certain evidence that explosives were used to bring down the towers. So you have like this chain of evidence which has been almost destroyed and then polluted after the fact with people saying, just things that aren't true, that Pulit's not a demolition term. It most certainly is. I assure you this.
Well, I could go on about World Trade Center Building 7 at 47 stories high and built of red granite masonry. WT7 differed significantly from World Trade Center Buildings 1 and 2. And those two buildings collapsed. Their falling debris caused significant damage to the World Trade Center Building 7, which included extensive fires that burned all day.
Right, but Michael.
Yeah.
I want some clarity on this. Okay.
We have Madrid Tower that burned all day, man.
You're an educated man. I'm not asking you to be an expert in something you're not expert in. If you run the experiment in your mind, if you cause fires inside of Building 7 to burn all day in a way that structurally compromises it so that it ends up collapsing, are you telling me that the collapse you envision looks like the one you saw in those videos where it falls all at once, like every pillar was cut at the same moment?
Yeah, absolutely. This is what all the experts, demolition experts say. Yeah.
No, in fact, the NIST report refused to discuss how it fell. It stopped its analysis at exactly the moment it begins to fall.
Again, the insurance companies, they are motivated to find something. Column 7. Okay, guys. I mean, there's the stuff about the put trades and stocks in the airlines. There was stuff about the cell phone call. I mean, I just have pages and pages on this, on the cell phone calls.
Well, but
and so on. I mean, these are all anomalies with explanations.
I want to get this before we have to end this conversation. One thing that is true is there is a lot of collusion in the world that we discover later on that becomes incontrovertible. And then there's the question of, before these stories are understood, how we are to think about the evidence. And one thing that is always true, Michael, is that there is always an explanation for each piece of evidence. Some of those explanations sound robust, some of them sound incredibly feeble. But the fact that there's an answer for every question doesn't mean anything, because of course there would have to be.
Right.
Okay.
Right?
So
the answer to the question of were there more weapons than one at the Bobby Kennedy assassination at the Ambassador Hotel is there was only one weapon. Well, if there was only one weapon, why were there more bullet holes than that weapon could hold? Well, we don't know that because somebody lost a door frame. Right? That's the answer to the question. Somebody lost a door frame.
How did Sirhan's gun get behind and from the back? To fire that fatal shot, and that killed RFK. The shot.
Well, the people that were standing there, including Rayford Johnson, said he did it. They saw him pull the gun and shoot him.
There's no question that he shot at.
No question.
This has been fun, but I gotta
go.
I didn't. Yeah.
All right.
Really, we could go on for hours more. We can do part 2.
I'd be excited for that.
There are podcasters who do part 2.
Some things to research there, hopefully.
No. There's. I mean, it's an endless rabbit hole to go down. My book covers dozens of conspiracy theories, any one of which you could spend a lifetime doing nothing but that, like JFK.
All right. Well, I think that this was terrifically productive, even if it doesn't end with us having resolved all of these questions.
I think they
fairly
can't
well.
be. They can't be
Above
ultimately
us.
resolved.
Well, I hope
at
they
some
one day
level.
can. For one thing,
All right, gentlemen.
many of us need to live in a world in which we know how to think about these things. But anyway, thank you both for joining me. Michael, do you want to show your book and tell people?
Oh, well, the book is, yeah, sure, Conspiracy. There it is. And you can actually connect the dots, and not only spell conspiracy, you can spell CIA and Soros. So
Wow.
it's all there. It's all there.
So you have connected the dots for us.
Yep, there we
all
go.
right. Thank you. And Jeremy,
All
where
right.
can people find you?
My channel is The Alien Scientist on YouTube. I also have altpropulsion.com and alienscientist.com. I don't keep up with that website as much, but feel free to reach out to me, and I'm always available for debates, live chats, or discussions and stuff like that. I enjoy discussing all these topics and researching them, learning new facts. So.
Wonderful. All right. Well, may skepticism and parsimony be with you both. I look forward to part two.
I like that. That's a good line. All right. Bye, gentlemen.
Well, that was amazing. I look damn good in a suit and with my haircut. So let me know what you guys thought in the comments down below. And this is great. We're finally sticking it to the reality. We called him on so many points, and I think getting the truth out about all these things, it's going to start with more current events. And I think that right now, with the presidency in shambles, they're trying. I mean, Biden administration screwed up. Let's be honest. That they tried one of their political opponents in a court, and they've really started to expose how corrupt and backwards the court systems are in America, and what, this stuff that they argue, these court rulings that were had in these other trials and stuff. And as we're seeing, lawfare is a whole nother war game. And that guy that I brought up, William Joseph Bryan, was a king of hypnotism and CIA lawfare. So really interesting connections there for people to look into and look up with that. But yeah, the whole lawfare thing is interesting because we just had this whole Trump trial, and now everyone's talking about, oh, this guy's a convicted felon and we can't bring him into the White House. And my experience with the criminal justice system is all it takes is a phone call to 911 and two people to convict a person, and they could be completely made up. And I know people that have gotten jumped by 5 people, fought back, and gotten that person sent to jail for a long period of time over, because the 5 people testified against the one and said that, it just goes to show you that lies can stand up in court. Lies can stand up in a court of law, and a court conviction in a court of law really means nothing in this country anymore. And it's sad to say it really has gotten that bad. But I will say that, I don't think that anyone really gets a fair trial anymore. 97% of court cases end in a plea bargain agreement, which is behind closed doors. No one's given a trial. When you are given a trial, I don't think it's fair at all. There's all kinds of laws to it and rules to it. If you got to afford your own attorney, if you can't afford an attorney, they give you one from the court who basically works for them and tries to work out a deal with you. They don't want to go to trial, and if they do go to trial, they won't represent you, and they don't really care about your case, and they'll switch lawyers with you last minute right before your trial too, and just send you with someone who knows nothing about your case, and you lose. It's the world's crazy. It's ridiculous. It should have, it's really crazy what goes on. But I think that if hopefully what can happen. I mean, I really don't like Trump. I know I don't like Trump, but man, I almost want Trump to win this whole election so that he can overturn all this bullshit. And like we got people from January 6th going to jail who were led in by the FBI and the Capitol Police and Nancy Pelosi and a whole group of these COINTELPRO provocateurs, including Alex Jones, who was a big part of that. I believe. I don't know. I'd like to talk with Alex about all these things. I'd like to have a big conversation with Alex, because I see a lot of people standing up for Alex Jones right now. And, I I think that Alex Jones is a dirtbag. And if he deserves to be fined $1.5 billion for spreading disinformation, then Anthony Fauci absolutely deserves to be, sent to prison and be fined, at least fined, $1.5 billion and sent to jail, because what he did is far worse. They created COVID-19 in a Wuhan biolab. They leaked it just in time for, the election for Trump. So that they could blame all on Trump's mismanagement of the crisis and say that, oh, it's Trump's fault that he mismanaged. Dude, he's responding to a completely unknown thing that really never happened before, because Fauci funded the research at the Wuhan biolab that created that disease and then released it. And then right in time for election, they have everyone on lockdown. And then there's this whole allegation of, these votes going in at 3 a.m. on this mail-in ballots. Because everyone mailed in ballots from home because we're all home on the pandemic. So it's just like, it's political setup for all these things. And then, people got mad because, they locked us down and they set up the ballots and it looked like a set up an election. It did. It should have been, they should have canceled everything and just held a new election right away and to do away with all that, but they didn't. They locked us down. The people who locked us down should be investigated, along with Fauci, along with Bill Gates, along with all these people. And by investigated, I mean, like, if you're accused of mass murder, like creating a super virus, a weapon that mass murdered and killed a whole bunch of people, if it were me or you, they'd just raid your house at 4 a.m., shoot your dog, and put you in jail with no trial, hold you without a bail, and then read all your emails and listen to all your phone calls for a year while they held you, and then seize all your property, like go through all your stuff, tear up your house, take everything that you have and bring it into evidence and it to be used against you in court. None of that happened with any of these people. They brought them to this fake mock-up trial in front of the Congress the other day, where Marjorie Taylor Greene gets to look like this lunatic conspiracy theorist, accusing Fauci of all this, refusing to call him doctor. He's a doctor, all right. He's an evil government scientist doctor. There's lots of doctors that are bad people, that don't care about patients or any of that stuff, like Joseph Mengele or, there's tons of examples. I won't even get into it. Not my expertise, but listen, so many, this whole COVID narrative, I said it came from a Wuhan lab. I was called a racist and told, that it came from bat soup, which isn't racist, apparently, to say that, these people eating bats at a wet market are the reason we have COVID spreading around. That it just made none of the narrative made any sense. It still doesn't, but there's still all these bots and shills out there trying to hold it up. It's just crazy. Fauci, as you know, he created a drug that to supposedly treat AIDS in the 80s that killed about 700,000 people. Experimental drug that, so they were doing experiments with AIDS virus and all that stuff. It's real sketchy what happened there with Robert Gallo and the whole AIDS origin story as well. But where did AIDS come from? They say it came from a monkey, right? They say it came from some guy, caught it from a monkey, right? Yeah, I'm sure we believe that after what happened with the COVID-19 virus and the way that they collaborated. The emails have come out now. You can read the emails. Let's see if I can find those and bring those up. It would be nice to talk about those emails. And in case you're wondering what happened with the channel, I did get my 100,000 subscriber plaque finally. I was threatening to take down all my videos if YouTube didn't, fix this thing. I complained about this right before Christmas because it's like almost Christmas time, and I'm like, I should have that, plaque for Christmas, man. That'd be awesome. And so I wrote a letter to YouTube, and they've been sending me we're going to look into this. We have an internal team. Every week they send me a new letter from somebody else saying that, they're postponing the investigation into this. I'm like, how hard is it to just go to my channel and say I got 100,000 subscribers and click approve? I didn't get it. So it took 6 months, and finally they approved it. So thank you, YouTube. I'm now part of YouTube history, and these videos will never be taken down, and they will stay up forever as a monument to the whole history. even if it is the blacklisted history. People can go back and look and say, oh, wow, this guy, is a part of YouTube history. He started in 2008 and was making videos getting 100,000, a million views before he started really talking about, before he made a bombshell documentary about 9/11, and they shut him off for good. And they said, no, don't ever listen to this guy again. No. This guy's a nut job. Right. Yeah, and I've been 100K for ages too, which is ridiculous. So, yeah, it doesn't make any sense, like most stuff. But, anyways, yeah, that's all done. The Fauci emails are important because what it proves is that they conspired to disinform the public, and they also misspelled names in the Fauci emails on purpose. They intentionally misspelled people's names so that they couldn't be found through FOIA requests. So when people did FOIA requests for this information, they couldn't get that. That wouldn't show up because they misspelled the names. So people found this. They caught onto it, and some of those emails are just damning evidence, man. And it's like, how are these people not treated like regular criminals? Like the FBI seems to just like cover for these people. It's like, when they realized what a honeypot Epstein's operation was, they didn't want to arrest him. They wanted to sit there for 10 years and gather as much intelligence as possible. And then how many of those people have been arrested? And why isn't the clients list published? And why is that all like super secret? And then why did the head of the FBI at the time, Louis Freeh, go switch out right before 9/11? And then he's now the lawyer for the guy who supposedly funded 9/11, Bandar Bush. So Louis Freeh, the former FBI director, it's like, it's just crazy how bad the corruption, how obvious and in your face it is these days. And I just loved sticking it to the skeptics who think that, the world is exactly the way the government tells us it is. But anyways, yeah, man, I'm gonna keep trying to get more of those interviews, especially the ones where I can wear a suit to, because damn, I think that, I made Dark Journalists a little jealous there with that one. Anyways, guys, yeah, we're gonna do this, man. We're gonna do this. That whole perception management thing. We're exposing it, man, one step at a time. Thank you all for watching. I'm gonna have another special here soon in a couple days. Some more exciting. I'm gonna do like a whole 9/11 special, where we'll dig into deep on all that stuff, and I won't get interrupted on any of the points. Like Shermer just kept on bringing it back to no plane theory, and you believe that planes hit the towers, right? I'm like, dude, I'm so like on a level beyond any of that stuff, clearly, but you're bringing it down to that, really? I mean, it was just, anyways. Hopefully we'll have a round two, and we'll just start right off with 9/11, right where we left off, and there'll be no yeah, Philip Marshall. That's an interesting one. Go check out what happened to Philip Marshall, because I think I emailed back and forth with Philip Marshall back in the day, because I was in on this. I was doing 9/11 stuff, activism back in like 2004 on another YouTube channel that I had way back. So yeah, man. I'm going to open this up. Anyone wants to come hang out for a bit, but then I got to get going. So there's only later. I'm going to close it out here.